Chapter 22. The guards of the Duke's mansion were already guarding all the exits of the Duke's mansion. They believed that no one would be able to enter or leave under their watch. With the help of Aisha, Bane and Gina were able to predict the enemy's moves. They were able to walk through the Duke's mansion in an extremely dangerous manner, as if there was no one there. However, as the enemy's search area was gradually shrinking, this situation could not be maintained for too long. With the help of Aisha, Bane had already arrived at the room where the alarm was triggered. This room was extremely huge. Bane had never seen such a spacious room before. Bane guessed that this must be the reception hall of the Duke's mansion or some other important place. In any case, it was definitely not used by the owner in his daily life. If he had a bed here, he would have to walk a long distance to get to the door every day. Rich people, in the eyes of ordinary people, were very perverted and twisted and full of unreasonable vanity. However, they would not torture themselves and would not make life difficult for themselves. Didn't you say there was a secret passage? Where is it? After Bane rushed into the big house, he quickly scanned the surrounding environment. However, because the owner did not turn on any lights, the whole house was very dark. Bane could not see very clearly. However, he was sure that there was nothing like a secret passage or something like that. Are you so anxious that you became stupid? If a secret passage or mechanism can be found easily, then what's the point of it existing? After building it, invite the neighbors to visit and then show off how rich your family is? Hurry up and find it. Isn't this kind of thing a thief is good at? Aisha ridiculed while urging him. She only knew that there was a secret passage here, but she did not know how to enter it. Every secret passage had a different way of entering. Some were knocking on the wall twice, some were rotating the oil lamp, and some were simply pulling open the bookshelf to open a secret passage. Who knew what kind of trick this secret passage had? Damn it! In your heart, thieves can do so many things. If it was so useful, how could there be so few people in this profession? Bane could not help but curse in his heart. Thinking about it, the situation just now was critical, and he didn't have the time to think carefully. When he heard that there was a secret passageway, he immediately rushed over. However, whose secret passageway would be easily found by outsiders? Bane became anxious. If they couldn't find it, the final result would only be to catch a turtle in a jar. Mr. Bane, Kina called him softly. Bane turned his head to look at her. Kina still had that gentle and beautiful smile on her face. Bane couldn't help but slowly calm down. He didn't know why Gina could still maintain such a perfect smile. Was it because of her powerful, aristocratic education? Or was it Kina's own strength that allowed her to remain calm in the face of danger? Bane only felt that he was too weak, far inferior. Gina seemed to be one of those ruthless characters who was really suitable to play under the light, while he had already lost his footing. What's wrong? Bane collected his thoughts and asked as calmly as possible. Look. Kina raised her hand and pointed. Bane looked at the direction Kina was pointing at. It was a bookshelf that wasn't too big for this room. It could even be said that it was very delicate. With just a simple count, one would know that there were exactly 66 books neatly stacked on the bookshelf. There were 11 books on each layer and a total of 6 rows. It was just enough to fill the entire bookshelf without any space. It was as if the bookshelf was made for these books. The bookshelf. Is there anything strange about it? The style of the bookshelf perfectly blended into the room. It was obviously made by the same renovation master. Therefore, even though the bookshelf was slightly smaller, it didn't look out of place at all. The bookshelf isn't strange. What's strange is those books. Those books are the scriptures of the Church of Light. There isn't a single book missing. The first 39 books are called the Book of God. It mainly tells the story of the creation of the gods, the destruction of the world by the god of darkness, and the re-guidance of the god of light to save the world. The last 27 books are called the Book of Man. It tells the story of the Holy Spirit's reformation of mankind. Together, it can be called the Holy Bible of Light. The original version of the Holy Bible of Light has always been in the hands of the saints. It has been passed down from generation to generation. These are all printed versions. Bane didn't understand. Why did she start talking about the scriptures of the Church of Light? What's so strange about this? Bane really didn't know how many Holy Bible of Light there were in total and what content was in each book. However, he knew that with the influence of the Church of Light on the continent, even if it was a rich family, it wouldn't be strange for every family to have a set. It was just that he didn't want to interrupt her. Moreover, Aisha didn't say anything. It was as if she was dead. What's strange is that Duke Lawrence, as a noble of the Empire, shouldn't put the Holy Bible of Light in his own house so openly. Therefore, there must be something wrong here, Kina said with certainty. Bane felt that it didn't make any sense. Why couldn't he let the Duke put a set of scriptures in his own house? Could it be that the Wind-Moon Empire didn't allow the nobles to believe in religion? However, he didn't ask. He only whispered in his heart that Kina wasn't as unreliable as a certain witch. If Kina dared to say it, then Bane would dare to believe her. Moreover, Bane didn't want to waste time on religious discussions. That was what Aisha and Staya did. Try the first book, Kina said to Bane. Bane didn't say anything. He rushed to the front of the bookshelf and jumped up to touch the first book. His movements were smooth, like flowing water. When he landed, there wasn't any sound at all. He was like a cat, swift and gentle. However, when he got close to the book, Bane couldn't help but glance at it. On the spine of the book was written Genesis. Bane touched the book and moved it. However, he didn't succeed in taking it off the bookshelf. That Genesis tilted on the bookshelf, but didn't fall down. It was as if it was one with the bookshelf. No, it was one with the bookshelf. Bane couldn't help but smile. He knew that they finally found the mechanism of the secret passage. Success. How is it? I told you that I can help you. Kina proudly asked him for credit. Her expression was like a little girl who was acting coquettishly to her friend. It was a far cry from the unfathomable expression she had just now. Bane nodded heavily. At the same time, he was thinking which one was the real Kina. He felt that he didn't know Kina anymore. If Aisha knew what he was thinking, she would definitely praise him. A man's most ignorant and arrogant time was when he thought that he understood a woman. When he realized that he didn't understand her, it meant that he was smarter than before. Of course, it was just a little bit. If it was Jilin, he would say that there was always more than one side to humans. It might be true, or it might not be true. Humans were really king complicated creatures. After referring to his partner's thoughts, Bane only felt more confused. After all, one was not a human, and the other was an old witch who was at least 100 years old. It was just that Bane didn't know. How could these two be used as a reference for humans? He didn't think about Staya's thoughts. That lady was even more ignorant than he was. In a very short period of time, Bane's thoughts flashed through his mind very quickly. It was like a meteor shower in the sky, one after another, and it disappeared in a flash. The heavy sound of the mechanism echoed in the empty room. For Bane, it was an escape door that was about to open. However, Bane didn't feel very good. He felt that the door that was about to open was like the door to hell. The heavy sound of the mechanism was the background music of the devil that was about to appear. He was on his guard. He stared at the bookshelf, hoping to see the legendary classic scene of the bookshelf moving away by itself. However, as the saying goes, 9 out of 10 things don't go your way. Bane suddenly felt that there was nothing under his feet. What followed was a huge sense of weightlessness. Bane was completely unprepared. All of his attention was focused on the bookshelf. He didn't make any reaction other than shouting, F***CK? Bane was falling from the hole that suddenly appeared. He instantly took out the glowing crystal from his pocket and threw it down with all his might. This series of reactions wasn't slow, but he almost landed at the same time as the crystal. Luckily, the hole wasn't deep. It seemed like the Duke didn't want the intruder to fall to his death, Bane thought. Bane looked around. Gina didn't seem to have fallen with him. Aisha, can you hear me? Bane tried to call Aisha, but there was no response. It seemed like the secret passage was well sealed. It blocked the detection of the crystal bats. This was also the reason why Aisha didn't know how to enter the secret passage, even though she knew there was a secret passage. Bane actually felt relieved. Before he came out, Staya had secretly told him that Aisha was a temperamental person. He shouldn't mess with her. She might throw him somewhere when he used the teleportation circle. Or she might leave without looking back when he was in danger. She wouldn't even say goodbye to him. Bane swallowed his saliva. Now that he had fallen here, he couldn't blame her even if he died. Humans were like that. They could accept any bad outcome, but they definitely couldn't accept the betrayal of their companions, even if they had already thought of the possibility of betrayal. Bane shook his head and mocked himself. Bane raised his head and looked at the secret passage in front of him. It was made of stone without any patterns or carvings. It looked very monotonous, but it also looked very simple and reliable. The path was straight without any curves. It wasn't very wide. It could only accommodate 2 people walking side by side. However, the lights on both sides lit up the path very brightly. Bane got up and walked forward. Indeed, there was no turning back. If he kept staying here, he would be caught sooner or later. People could always explode with a kind of heroic spirit when they were in a desperate situation. A more artistic way of saying it would be, even if I die 9 times, I still have no regrets. A normal person's way of saying it would be, since it's already like this, what else can I do? Bane walked alone in the bright, secret passage. The thief's equipment didn't allow him to make any footsteps. The entire secret passage was silent. There was only one person walking alone in silence. It was like walking on the path to a new world. Chapter 23. At first, Bane walked carefully in the secret passage, peeking his head out and bowing his head. However, he soon realized that it was pointless. This was a straight secret passage. There were no forks or obstacles along the way. If there really was someone standing on this path, they would definitely be able to see him from afar. There would be nowhere for him to hide. Bane decided to go with the flow and walked forward quickly. Not long after, Bane reached the end of the bright path. In front of him was a completely dark space. The light in the secret passage was swallowed by the darkness before he could go far. The space was like an endless abyss of darkness, or a giant beast that was about to devour its prey. Bane mustered up his courage and walked forward. Just as he stepped out of the secret passage and stepped on the space with one foot, a series of cracking sounds came from above his head. Then, a strong white light appeared abruptly in this space. It spread into the distance bit by bit, driving away the darkness and finally illuminating the entire space. Bane squinted his eyes at the sudden appearance of the strong light. It took him a while to get used to it. This was a huge space, a huge underground secret chamber. It was completely different from the simple painting style of the secret passage. There were countless symbols carved here and all kinds of paintings with unknown meanings. For some reason, the most shocking thing was the painting of the megalosaurus. The megalosaurus was flying in the sky, and wherever it passed, the earth burned. The painting of the witch was more familiar. Bane was puzzled. But soon, Bane's attention shifted from the magnificent carvings to the only living person in this space other than himself. There was a high platform in this secret chamber with a wide chair. The middle-aged man was lying on it, snoring softly. The sudden light shone on the man's face, disturbing his nap. Judging from the man's clothes, he should be a warrior who had been on the battlefield for a long time. He did not have the ability to sleep soundly, even when someone was talking in his ear. He couldn't help but frown as he slowly woke up. The man sat up and calmed himself down before he started to look around. That's right, it was the safest and most secretive basement in his house. Then, the man began to shake his head and sigh that time was unforgiving. He was really getting old. Originally, he just wanted to rest a little while his subordinates went out to catch the thief, who knew that he would fall asleep. It seemed that things had not been going well for him recently, and he was mentally and physically exhausted. The man blinked hard and raised his head. He saw Bane standing not far from the entrance. There was only silence. Duke Lawrence couldn't help but laugh, breaking the awkward silence. Bane understood that he was mocking his stupidity and his bad luck. What do you mean by there's a path to heaven, but you refuse to take it, and instead, you barge into hell? Although the description was not very accurate, but this was the portrayal of Bane's heart at that time. He was like a sheep that broke into a wolf's castle, running around. Although it looked very dangerous, he was fine until he lost his footing and fell into the soup pot. The old wolf closed the lid of the pot and turned on the fire, thinking that it saved him a lot of trouble. "Kid, You don't look like someone from our snow wind empire, right? You came from afar and spent so much effort to sneak into my duke's mansion. What are your intentions? Duke Lawrence didn't seem to mind chatting with this unlucky thief, instead of immediately catching him and beating him half to death or directly killing him. Bane was indeed considered thin among the teenagers. His height was just over 160 centimeters, which might be normal in other empires. But in the Snow Wind Empire, it was rare for a 16-year-old teenager to be less than 180 centimeters. That was why Duke Lawrence concluded that Bane was not from the Snow Wind Empire. The people of the Snow Wind Empire were simple, crude, and effective. I'm a traveling adventurer. I came here to help a pitiful girl retrieve an important lost item. Bane didn't lie to him. There was nothing to lie about. Since he had already been bumped into, Bane could only use his identity as an adventurer to protect himself, so as to avoid any unimaginable inhumane treatment. Nonsense. My Lawrence family followed the Iron Blood Emperor through fire and water, established a foundation for generations, and made illustrious contributions. Who doesn't respect us? Even if we are no longer as glorious as we used to be, how can we degrade ourselves and steal a girl's things? Kid, don't be presumptuous and insult my family's martyr. I will tear you to pieces. Even the adventurer agreement won't be able to protect you. Duke Lawrence suddenly stood up and shouted loudly. He was really righteous and awe-inspiring. It really made people feel that he couldn't do something as despicable as stealing a little girl's things. Bane thought, do all nobles speak like this? If you say you didn't steal it, then wouldn't it be over? Why did you mention your family's ancestors? Could it be that you have a guilty conscience? You say in the end, what did I steal? I want to see how you are slandering me. Duke Lawrence said. It could be seen that he was really angry about this matter, just like a red-eyed, irritable bull. Indeed, this kind of thing was too degrading for him. It was like a toad jumping on his foot, purely disgusting and disgusting. A dagger with patterns engraved on it that isn't very sharp? It seems like it occasionally glows. Bane felt that his words were made up on the spot, but there was no other way. He only knew so much about the lost item. Even Gina didn't explain it in detail. Duke Lawrence didn't react like Bane had imagined after hearing these words that seemed to be used to deceive a child. He would either shout nonsense or laugh in disdain. He didn't even bother to argue. Instead, he was silent for a moment and calmed down. He pulled out the sword that was hanging on his waist and walked towards Bane step by step. Who are you? How do you know Morag's blade? Bane was a little confused. Just now, the Duke was so magnanimous and magnanimous. He was even willing to chat with the thief who broke into his house. Why did he have such a big reaction when he mentioned a dagger that he didn't even know about? There was only one possibility. The Duke knew what it was. Bane knew that he couldn't run away, but he still didn't want to wait for death. No matter what, it was necessary to struggle. But he immediately found that he couldn't move. Duke Lawrence's aura had completely locked onto him. The level gap was too big. Bane was directly suppressed to the point that he couldn't move. To be able to inherit the title of Duke in this kind of top family, all kinds of talents and temperament were indispensable. At this critical moment, a purple magic circle suddenly appeared on the ground beside Bane. Duke Lawrence cautiously retreated, and at the same time, he activated the secret room's alarm. Everyone in the Duke's mansion would immediately rush here after hearing the alarm. He had already realized that this was not a simple group of thieves. They might be planning something big. The person who appeared from the magic circle was naturally Aisha. This time, Bane was really scared. According to Staya's words, if Bane fell into the trap, Aisha should just turn around and leave without saying a word as if it had nothing to do with her. Because to Aisha, if the price of saving Bane exceeded Bane's value, how much could a tier 2 thief be worth? It was definitely not as expensive as the teleportation circle just now. Wait a moment. Aisha's first sentence after appearing out of thin air was to Duke Lawrence. A witch. Compared to Aisha's arrogant appearance, the Duke seemed to care more about her identity as a witch. Not only did he wait for her, but he also raised his hand to stop his subordinates who had already entered the secret room and wanted to attack. Bane saw the guards coming in from all the entrances and immediately knew that there was more than one entrance. He probably went the wrong way. Who would design a secret passage that dangerous? Bane complained in his mind. Aisha didn't do anything after greeting him. She just stared at the carvings on the wall and ignored the fact that she was surrounded. The carvings on the wall were of the past glory of the witch. Sorry, forgive me for interrupting your reminiscence. Which, Lady Aisha? Duke Lawrence recognized Aisha. It seems like Aisha is really famous, Bane thought. This is not a polite thing to do, little guy. Aisha withdrew her gaze and spoke in a calm and low voice. In Bane's eyes, she seemed to be a different person. Aisha never revealed her age. Staya and Jilin never told him either. However, when he listened to Aisha and Staya quarreling, he always heard Staya calling Aisha an old witch. However, when they were alone, Aisha always forced Bane to call her sister. But now, Aisha actually called a middle-aged man with a full beard little guy. The scary thing was that the middle-aged man didn't seem to feel that there was anything wrong with it. At that moment, Aisha seemed to have awakened her true self from her memories. But it was only for a moment. Aisha once again put on her usual smiling expression. She had turned back into that young and beautiful which who could charm all living things. Bane looked at the change in Aisha and the smile on her face. When he thought of Gina's fearless smile in the face of danger, Bane only felt a chill down his spine. He suddenly thought of a sentence that he didn't know where he heard from. The smile of humans is the most untrustworthy. Behind the smile, there is a lot of helplessness. A person with so much helplessness can still smile so beautifully. How fake. I want to say that this might be a misunderstanding. We seem to have been deceived. Aisha said this sentence out of nowhere. An incredulous thought suddenly popped up in Bane's mind. Bane's eyes slowly widened, but his pupils rapidly shrank. Chapter 24. Who betrayed us? Bane asked in disbelief. He couldn't believe his own conjecture. There were only 3 of them, and then Aisha told him that they were betrayed. Who was Aisha talking about? He didn't even need to use his brain to guess. But no, that was Gina. She was a noble lady who had always been gentle to him. She was a very reliable companion. Although it was difficult for them to come this far, she had never made any mistakes. Wasn't she more reliable than the companion in front of him right now? More importantly, when they first met, she walked out of the black door with a touch of Snow White and directly walked into his heart. Didn't he half-heartedly promise Aisha that he would overestimate himself and confess to her after that? Why did it suddenly become like this? In Bane's heart, Gina had always been like a little white rabbit. She was cute and kind. What kind of pervert would think that a little white rabbit would jump up behind you and stab you with red eyes? Although the rabbit did jump quite high, and her eyes were also quite red, Aisha looked at Bane and didn't say anything. It was a witch's tradition not to answer the low IQ questions of others. Moreover, in Aisha's long life, she had seen many people who couldn't accept the reality and lied to themselves. There were definitely many such people among humans. Humans even summed up a term for these people called self-deception. When humans lied to themselves, no matter what others said to them, it was useless. They could only figure it out by themselves. Aisha deeply understood this point. After Bane fell into the trap, Gina suddenly disappeared from my detection. Although the crystal bat isn't a high-level work, it isn't something that anyone can hide from. There are only 2 possibilities. First, Gina hid a lot of her strength, at least purple gold level. She can hide it under the premise that she is prepared. Second, there's a witch who made a work for Gina that can avoid detection. Either way, it means that Gina has other companions besides us, but we don't know anything about them. Aisha calmly analyzed. Then what do you want to do? You should know that when I saw you, I didn't have any hostility towards you. You can leave at any time. Just don't let others know that you have come here. Duke asked, It's good that you know this kind of thing. Why are you still talking about it in public and slapping yourself in the face? Of course I want revenge. You should know that it's not the style of a witch to go home without saying a word after suffering a loss. Aisha said with hatred. Her expression was the standard expression that would make people hit a dead end. She was like Guan Yu who waited patiently for someone to finish playing with his sword in front of his door. Then, before he had time to pick up his green dragon crescent blade and go out to teach the arrogant kid a lesson, Bane turned his head and secretly glanced at Aisha. He knew that this sister was really pissed off this time. She was always the one who provoked others. Who provoked her? She was gnashing her teeth and wanting revenge. Although it was really annoying to be deceived, but in the blink of an eye, it made him and Gina stand on opposite sides. He felt that he still couldn't do it. Bane was still unwilling to admit that it was betrayal. It was just wishful thinking that Gina just didn't tell them the whole story. Of course, Duke knew about the bad habit of witches. They couldn't bear to see others being smarter than them. If anyone dared to trick them in this aspect, they would definitely not let it go. They would do anything without exception. Although she did disappear from my detection, I can still feel her occasionally. I know that after she disappeared, she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she took something with her. Is it the Morag's blade you mentioned just now? Aisha looked at Duke and said. Now that she needed the Duke's information, she had to pull him to her side. The mission didn't matter anymore. What? The Morag's blade was stolen. Quick, send someone to take a look. Duke couldn't believe it. He immediately waved his hand and shouted. That treasure was protected by a powerful magic restriction. It shouldn't be stolen so easily. But deep in his heart, he already believed what Aisha said. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so emotional. What exactly is that thing? Bane asked the most important question. What exactly was it that made Gina go to such an extent and made Duke Lawrence turn pale with fright? It's a long story. It was the standard beginning of a long story. It's okay. Anyway, we have nothing to do now. Aisha put on a look that looked like she was ready to listen carefully. Her attitude was very different from when Gina wanted to start the story like this. Well, if Lady Aisha doesn't count the small human countries, there are a total of 5 empires on this known continent. The Snow Wind Empire in the north, the Simai Empire in the west, the Holy Dragon Empire in the east, the Nanshin Empire in the south, and the Middle Empire in the center. The 5 great empires each had their own foundation, and each had their own support. The Simai Empire borrowed the power of the God of Light through the Church of Light, and used the holy light to purify the monsters that crawled out of the hellfire. Before the Red Disaster incident happened a year ago, it was a country that was second only to the Middle Empire. The Holy Dragon Empire borrowed the power of the Holy Megalosaurus that was passed down from generation to generation since the founding of the empire. It occupied the sky and used the dragon's might to deter the monsters in the sea and the abyss. The Nanshin Empire was the most direct. They directly had the protection of the god of war. The warriors of the Nanshin Empire could all turn into sharp blades. There was also the so-called sigil that was added to the cavalry. It turned them into boulders that rolled down from the top of the mountain and crushed the barbarian beastmen that tried to invade the central plains. The Middle Empire was the most mysterious. No one knew what their support was. It was unfathomable. This showed that there wasn't any human empire that could reach this stage by relying on humans alone. Then what about our Snow Wind Empire? The whole continent knew that the Snow Wind Empire borrowed the technology of the dwarves. Our city can move. The city walls were filled with countless energy cannons. It was like a mountain that stood in the wind and snow, vigilant against enemies that might come out from the other side of the wind and snow. Bane listened to the Duke's narration and only felt tired. It turned out that those high and mighty behemoths didn't just enjoy being high and mighty and being worshipped by thousands of people. They also had their own more important responsibilities. As a barrier, they defended the entire human race against foreign enemies. And humans were besieged on all sides. No wonder the people of the Simai Empire said, if you want to wear a crown, you have to bear its weight. He didn't get anything for free. But everyone knew that the dwarves were just blacksmiths who could only forge weapons a few decades ago. How did the Wind Moon Empire establish itself in the continent before that? The Duke paused slightly. Aisha frowned. Perhaps an individual human is kind, but as the second largest organization in human history, the country is definitely not. Because every country has the righteousness of, for their own people in their hands, They could do anything without any psychological pressure. The Snow Wind Empire has so much land. If they didn't have the corresponding strength, the other countries would not hesitate to pounce on them. So before the dwarves, the Snow Wind Empire borrowed the power of the witches. Bane knew that the Duke's words were directed at him. Aisha had no reason not to know these things. Aisha was the most outstanding witch, and the Duke was the most powerful person in the Empire. If it was really like what the Duke said, that the relationship between the witches and the Snow Wind Empire was as close as the relationship between the Simai Empire and the Church of Light, then the two of them might have met or even been very familiar with each other. No wonder when the Duke saw Aisha, he didn't show any hostility. No wonder Aisha would call the other party little guy, and the dignified Duke didn't care about it all. At that time, the style of the Snow Wind Empire was very different from now. When I was very young, I could still see the witches flying around on brooms, and the streets were full of strange things. However, because of the rapid development of the Church of Light and the conflict of beliefs between the two sides, the Church of Light defined the witches as heretics and launched a decisive offensive. They called it the War of Beliefs, and we call it the War of Beliefs. Both sides refused the Empire's participation in the war, because once it became a war between the empires, the power of the human race would certainly suffer heavy losses. The witches failed because the Church of Light is a serious religion and has strict discipline. They listen to the command and fight in a systematic way. The witches are more like a group of undisciplined scholars. They only gathered for a common purpose, and no one listened to anyone, because each of them thinks that they are the smartest one. This is the persistence of scholars. Bane was speechless, thinking that the witches were really a group of heroes who would rather die than to stick to their individuality. But is it necessary? Isn't one in the west and one in the north? Both sides mind their own business. Do they have to fight to the death? And listening to your words, both sides seem to be deeply righteous people. Bane couldn't help but interject. He felt that it was completely unnecessary. The two sides were so far apart that they would feel tired just by walking over. Snatching territory? Moreover, the witches' territory didn't seem to be good. It was freezing cold. Just now I said that the country is the second largest organization in human history. Then, do you know what the largest organization is? The Duke smiled and looked at Bane. The Duke had a good impression of this thin and weak young man who had walked into the secret room by himself, especially after knowing that he was in cahoots with Lady Aisha. Bane shook his head, indicating that he didn't know. The largest organization of human beings is religion. Therefore, in some places, religion is above the country. If the country wants to fight, it must be driven by interests. Religion is different. They also have beliefs. When the Duke said this sentence, his eyes didn't shine with the usual inspiring light, but became dead silent, like a dark and calm pool. It seemed to contain the darkest darkness of human beings. There must be darkness in human organizations, and the bigger the organization, the more so. Chapter 25. That's enough. You don't have to go into detail about that. Aisha finally couldn't help but interrupt, her voice as cold as ice. For witches, that period of history was absolutely dark, and they didn't want to recall it. The Duke raised his hands resentfully, indicating that he understood, and then continued. In short, the witches failed, and the empire lost its support. If we want to continue as an empire and survive in the north, then we have to find new support, and the new support can't be too much weaker than the witches. You can imagine how difficult it is to find a force that isn't weaker than the witches, but isn't very famous. So the late king had no choice but to direct his search in the direction of the previous era, the era of the gods. I have to say that this was a crazy idea. Being born as a human and wanting to steal the power of the gods. Probably a normal person would think that they were overestimating themselves. So at that time, the late king was opposed by his ministers, but he still stubbornly insisted on his idea. He said, stealing the power of the gods is the easiest thing for humans to do. According to the records of the myths, it was because humans first stole the wisdom of the gods that they were expelled from the paradise and came to this world. The end of the era of the gods was also because humans used the power given by the gods to pull down the gods who were standing on top of their heads and became the masters of the world. So I don't think that wanting to use the power of the gods is overestimating oneself. It's just the old path that our ancestors took. You mean, during the era of the gods, humans used the power given by the gods to kill the gods? Bane asked doubtfully. All of this was beyond his imagination. It was too unbelievable. He had never heard of the era of the gods, except for myths and legends. But the Duke said it as if it was true, but there was a big problem with the logic, just like the story that Jilin once told him about the reindeer jumping off the cliff. Yes, only the gods can kill the gods, or it could be the weapons of the gods, or it could be the technology of the gods. The Duke said with certainty. Then why did the gods give people power? To let people kill them back? Vane said a very cold joke, but it was also a big logic flaw. The gods also have things that they want to fight for, just like the Church of Light and the witches. If you want greedy humans to believe in you, you have to give them some benefits. Also, if you have a group of slaves, you want them to be strong and do more work, not walk on the street and be blown to death by the wind. In the eyes of the gods, the people of that time were so weak. The Duke patiently explained to Bane. Then, why did the people of that time attack the gods who helped them? Bane asked. That's interesting. If you look at myths and legends, you will find that no matter which region the myth is from, the destruction of the world is inseparable. Most of the time, the destruction of the world is done by the most noble of gods. Some say that the gods sent down an unprecedented storm to drown the entire world, and only a very small number of people who were recognized by the gods were spared. Some say that the gods sent down thunder, and all of humanity perished. Some say that the threads of fate were cut by the gods, and the whole world ushered in the end. What's even more interesting is that in every myth, there are all kinds of demons and ghosts. They are the ones who have always wanted to destroy the world, but they have never succeeded. Looking at all the history and legends of humanity, only the gods have ever destroyed the world. The Duke said excitedly, as if he was cheering for the magnificent era of the deicide. And then, the humans killed the gods? Bane's voice trembled. It was all too crazy. That's right. When the power of the humans was not enough to fight against the gods, they worked wholeheartedly for the gods to gain their trust. When they felt that they had obtained enough power and knowledge from the gods, they lit the fire of war, and the entire human race united. They even joined forces with other races and attacked the gods without hesitation. They were not willing to wait for even a day longer. After all, who would want to live a precarious life, where their life and death depended on the whims of others? The Duke described a grand era in a few words. All the races united and charged towards the undefeatable enemy. The gods stood at the end of the world, supporting the heavens and the earth. All right, we already know that there's a historical tradition of humans stealing the power of the gods. Please continue. Just when Bane, the Duke, and the Duke's subordinates were dazzled by the grand era, Aisha did not care about the atmosphere at all, and forcibly dragged the topic back to the original track. The Duke really could not help but roll his eyes at Aisha. All right, the late king finally succeeded in convincing the ministers because they felt that what the late king said was indeed reasonable. Moreover, at that time, everyone was clear that the Snow-Wind Empire already had no way out, and there wasn't much time left. Thus, the Empire was determined to explore the various ruins left behind by the gods. But this matter was not easy, because the people in the gods' era were too impatient and underestimated the power of the gods. That battle was extremely tragic. It could almost be said that it was the battle of the end of the world. So there were not many traces of civilization left behind in the gods' era. But just when the Empire was facing internal and external troubles, should it be said that the gods were protecting them? Or was it something else? In short, the Empire coincidentally discovered the complete ruins of a city from the gods' era, Morag. At that time, the one who led the team to explore the ruins was my grandfather. At that time, he discovered Morag's blade, and felt that it was very extraordinary. At that time, the late king was very happy, and without thinking much, he gave the Morag's blade to my grandfather. After that, the whole continent knew about the story. The genius of the dwarves, rock steel, appeared out of nowhere and analyzed and absorbed the technology of the gods' era for the empire. The status of the dwarves rapidly rose. The situation of the empire changed in an instant. The Duke seemed to be somewhat depressed. He was not a person who was easily affected by his emotions, especially in front of his own subordinates. But Kina said that a dwarf gave it to his grandfather and then let you guys steal it. Bane murmured, as if he was still unwilling to accept the reality. But things were already very obvious. The Duke was now in an absolute advantage. He did not need to lie. He could even tell the origin of this thing, and it started from the gods' era. Moreover, it was F*King clear, and the structure was rigorous. On the contrary, compared to Kina's explanation, it was like the beginning of a story that was specially used to deceive children. It was as ridiculous as the mysterious white-bearded old grandpa or the main character falling down a cliff. When it came to the specific details, Kina would also be vague. But he was just a little unwilling. Bane's chest felt like it was being pressed by someone, and he could not breathe. His heart also felt like it was being squeezed tightly by someone. It did not hurt. It was just a little sore. So were his eyes. Then let's prepare to go to Morag. You know the way, right? Aisha said to the Duke. Bane stared blankly for a moment. Then he immediately understood Aisha's idea. Gina had spent a lot of effort to steal Morag's blade, so she naturally had a use for it. No one would spend so much effort to steal a useless thing. And where could that thing be used? It could only be that hidden city Morag. With Aisha's intelligence, she naturally would not chase after someone's ass. It would be easy to be led by the nose, and it would be twice the effort for half the result. Aisha's choice was to go directly to the destination and wait for Kina to walk into the trap. Of course I know, but are you sure? The Duke, of course, understood Aisha's idea. But if someone stole the thing, it was impossible for them not to guard against revenge, and they must have gathered a lot of forces in Morag. They knew very little about the enemy's strength. Was it really wise to directly rush into the enemy's base? It was not in line with the witch's usual practice to meet force with force. I'm sure, when the time comes, you and your people don't even need to do anything. We will solve it ourselves. Aisha smiled coldly, like the expression of a person who pinched a bottle. When Jilin agreed to lift the roof of the Saimai Empire's palace, he did not ask her about the strength of the opponents in the palace. The Duke looked at Aisha's smile and only felt a chill from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head, which was rare for someone of his level. He did not believe that Aisha, a legendary witch who had wandered alone in the continent for more than 100 years and had never wet her shoes, would make any arrogant, conceited, and reckless low-level mistakes like underestimating the enemy. It could only mean that Aisha had absolute confidence. But in the Snow-Wind Empire, the people who could reach Morag, even if they were weaker than him, they would not be much weaker. In the end, what kind of power could make Aisha treat his level of power as nothing? The Duke's hands slightly exerted force, looking at Aisha. No, to be precise, looking at the power behind Aisha. Just like the humans in the era of the gods looking up to the gods. Chapter 26. Are you not willing to help us? You should know that it is your item that has been stolen. Aisha hurriedly urged when she saw that the Duke was ignoring her. She didn't mention a single word about the help she had given Kina. If it wasn't for Aisha's help, Kina wouldn't have been able to sneak into the Duke's mansion and take away Morag's blade. In Aisha's view, the Duke had no reason to refuse her proposal. Being impulsive was not something that a person of the Duke's level would do. How could she have thought that the Duke was just scared by her arrogance of treating the enemy like dirt? No, let's go together. The Duke recovered and hurriedly replied. He had secretly left Wind Moon City and came here to gather a group of subordinates with the intention of going to Morag to do something. No matter how he looked at it, it was convenient. You said time. When do we leave? Aisha's words were concise and comprehensive. She now gave people the feeling of a tree branch covered in snow, standard cold and hard. The Duke frowned and thought about his arrangements, then said, the earliest would be the day after tomorrow. In the evening of the day after tomorrow, let's meet here again. Aisha nodded and pulled Bane to her side. The light of the magic circle lit up from the ground. When you see my other companions, I promise you will be surprised. Aisha smiled at the Duke. The magic circle shone brightly, and Bane and Aisha disappeared. The Duke breathed a sigh of relief. Facing Aisha, who had been famous since he was a child, there was still a certain amount of pressure. Duke, are the witches trustworthy? A warrior close to the Duke asked. Of course not. The witches can be said to be a group of lunatics. No one knows what they want to do. They also believe in the principle of profit above all. If the price is enough, they can even betray the gods they believe in, let alone their allies. However, there's a saying that there are two things that can unite people, a common ideal and a common crime. In my opinion, we can also add a common enemy. No matter how untrustworthy people are, we can temporarily trust them when we have a common goal. Understood. Go and prepare. Although we have Aisha's help this time, it's still very risky. We can't be careless. Also, we have to be careful with Aisha. The Duke didn't finish his sentence. He believed him for now, but he didn't believe him completely. With the end of the teleportation circle, Aisha and Bane had just landed on the ground when they felt a wave of extremely high temperature hitting them in the face. What greeted them was a stone wall glowing with a dark red light. They could imagine that there must be a lot of magma flowing below the stone wall. Bane was stunned. According to what Jilin said, he and Staya should be helping someone in a blacksmith shop. What kind of blacksmith shop was so powerful? Aisha was not confused. Her first thought was that Jilin must have gotten bored of the human world and went home. However, she soon realized that something was wrong. The stone walls of the Red Dragon Palace had been burned by Jilin into a beautiful, colorful glaze. It was not as natural as the stone walls in front of her. You two are here. It seems that things went well for you. Just when Bane and Aisha were a little confused, a young man's voice sounded behind them. Bane turned back and saw Jilin sitting in front of a big furnace. The gray furnace was burning red, as if it would melt soon, and a huge flame would burst out from it. Behind Jilin were countless huge machines running on the red volcanic rock. The sound of the machines was deafening. Countless dwarves were shuttling between the machines and working. He could also clearly see that Staya was talking to a few dwarves. She was too conspicuous in a group of dwarves. Stee sensed his gaze, turned her head, and waved at him with a smile. It was a huge underground cavern. Lava was flowing freely at the bottom of the cavern. The dwarves were building machines and towns on the volcanic rock. The whole space was filled with fire and iron. It's spectacular, isn't it? This is the capital of the dwarves, Svartal. I was shocked when I first came here. I always thought that only humans were good at building, but after seeing this underground city, I feel that the dwarves' building ability is not inferior to humans at all, Jilin said. Bane was so shocked that he could not speak. Where is this? Aisha asked. Although she had traveled the continent for many years, she had never been to a dwarven city. You don't know where this is. How did you teleport here? Jilin asked. After being with Aisha for a long time, he knew that the most important thing was that the person who set up the teleportation circle had to know the detailed coordinates of the destination. If they did not know, they could only set up a random teleportation circle. It was said that this was the most powerful and cruel way of dealing with the enemy. Before each move, they would say a particularly childish line. Let the god of darkness decide your fate. Then the enemy would be teleported to God knows where. Even the god of darkness did not know. It would have been better if Jilin did not mention this. Once he did, Aisha exploded. She shouted at Jilin. Do you know how much it cost me to turn you into this? I spent so much money on you. How can I let you out of my sight so easily? You are now my living coordinates. No matter where I am, I can teleport to you. Aisha could not forget the cost of turning Jilin into a human body. Every time she mentioned it, it would be like this. That doesn't feel too good. We are now in the east of the Snow Wind Empire and the north of the Holy Dragon Empire. This is the country of dwarves. Jilin felt that it was not something to be happy about when someone could appear by his side at any time. However, he could not explain why the dwarves are now divided into two factions, the new faction and the old faction. The new faction followed Ambassador Yin Gang into the Snow Wind Empire and created all kinds of new technology. The old faction is probably what we see now. They follow the current Dwarf King and still live in the Dwarven underground city. They still make traditional swords. But in order to oppose the new faction, the old faction became very hostile to outsiders. How do they let you in? Aisha asked. Oh, this is nothing. The whole Dwarven race is very good to me. The Dwarf King even said that he would make a sword for me. Jilin said proudly. Dwarves were more practical than humans. Aisha could not help but imagine a megalosaurus as tall as a castle waving a giant sword. Hey Heim, your furnace melted again. Jilin suddenly shouted. His loud voice echoed throughout the underground cave. All the dwarves stopped their work and looked in the direction of Jilin. After a few seconds of silence, the cheers of the entire dwarven race followed. It was so loud that Aisha's eardrums hurt. Looking at the burnt furnace in front of Jilin and the excited performance of the dwarves, Aisha understood why Jilin was so favored by the old faction. As the dwarves of the old faction, forging was all they pursued, so they also pursued higher temperature flames. Looking at this environment, it was not difficult to guess that the source of the dwarves' previous temperature was the underground magma. It was not easy to find something hotter than magma until they met Jilin. I'm here to ask you for help. Aisha suddenly said. What help? There's a problem with the mission. Jilin really did not expect that there would be a problem with the mission, and it was a problem that Aisha could not solve. When Aisha first came to the Red Dragon Palace, he did not know how she came. She came and went like a ghost, and she also brought a professional human thief who was not stupid. It was reasonable to say that it should be easy to just steal something. That's it, Jilin said. Although it was unexpected, it was just a game after all. There was no need to take it to heart. He was now more interested in the weapon that the Dwarf King said he would make for him. He had not used a human weapon yet. Bane turned his head and looked at Jilin. He did not expect this person to have the demeanor of a strong person. No, Aisha was unusually firm. That's not necessary. Jilin was surprised. We were cheated by our employer. This hatred must be avenged. Aisha was very reserved. She did not directly say that they were cheated. Jilin was speechless. He did not know what happened, but from Aisha's words, it seemed like she wanted to bring him to find a human to get back at him. This matter really didn't have much of an impact. Do you know about the era of gods? Aisha could see that Jilin did not want to take this trip. For a dragon, it was really not worth it to go all the way to find a human that they had never seen before. She could only think of a way to pique his interest. Era of gods? I've never heard of it, but I've heard of gods from my father. They are very powerful things. The powerful ones are comparable to my clan. They are not considered living creatures, so killing them is a bit troublesome. What's wrong? What kind of education did the dragons have since they were young? What was easy to kill, and what was difficult to kill? Aisha thought in her heart. The place we are going to is related to gods. It is a city left behind from the era of gods, Morag. Aisha said, What? Morag? Before Crimson Lynn could say anything, a low and deep voice suddenly sounded. Aisha looked towards the direction of the voice. A dwarf in luxurious clothes walked over with Staya and another dwarf behind him. Chapter 27. Let me introduce you. This is the Dwarf King, Bronzebeard. This is our mission's client, Mangshan. This is the legendary witch Aisha, who has been famous on the continent for a long time. That young man is called Bane. They are all our companions. Staya briefly introduced the two parties. A few days ago, Staya would have thought that this was very rude to the Dwarf King, but then Staya realized that the dwarves were all straightforward people. Where's Heim? Why didn't he come? He used to be very happy when I burned down a furnace. Jilin saw Mangshan and couldn't help but ask. He didn't care about the Dwarf King, who obviously wanted to speak. First of all, he's already a bit numb to your constant burning of furnaces. And second, I've told you many times, his name is Dumb. Because you called his name wrongly again, Dumb got angry, so he only asked me to come and check on the situation. It's still so horrible, but it's exciting. Mangshan couldn't hide his happiness. Welcome, human and witch. You are Jilin's friends, which means you are also the dwarf's friends. In the territory of the dwarves, you could go anywhere you want. The Dwarf King finally interrupted. Thank you for your hospitality, Bane and Aisha said together. I think I heard you mention Morag just now. The Dwarf King said, Yes, I'm trying to convince Jilin to go to Morag with me to settle a grudge. Aisha clenched her teeth and said angrily, What the hell is going on? Jilin finally asked. It was rare to see Aisha like this. She always had a smile on her face. She rarely showed her true emotions, except when she was fighting with Staya. It's nothing, Staya told me before. It's impossible not to wet your shoes when you walk by the river. Revenge is a dish best served cold. After hearing Aisha's description of the incident, Jilin scratched his head and didn't know what to say. He glanced at Staya and suddenly remembered to comfort Aisha. What are you talking about? You should say, let's go and take revenge. Aisha was speechless by Jilin's words. She glared at Staya. I don't think you've suffered any losses. Why not let him go? To Jilin, this was like having a friend who had been bitten by a mosquito. Then, he ran over and said, Let's go. I can find that mosquito. You could take revenge with me. What do you do now? He could only persuade him nicely, hoping that his friend would calm down and at least stop bothering him. He couldn't possibly follow him to catch mosquitoes, could he? Ben nodded as he watched from the side. He thought so too. Why are you nodding? Can't you be more mature? Aisha was furious when she saw him like that. That's right, what's wrong with you? How many days has it been since you saw the human girl? How can you be charmed by her so quickly? I really couldn't tell at first. You weren't even afraid of death back then. How did you fall for this? Jilin immediately followed Aisha and teased Bane. Since ancient times, heroes who weren't afraid of death had fallen for this. Bane thought in his heart, but when the words came out of his mouth, he just said, That's different. It's indeed different. Humans can't predict when they're lustful. Maybe they don't even know what they'll do next. Speaking of which, humans are really impulsive and unstable creatures, Jilin said. Who did you learn this idiom from? Bane felt a little guilty. He acted as if he was angry because he suddenly realized that Jilin's idiom was very accurate. He really hadn't seen Gina for long. How could he fall for her so deeply? Could it really be like what Jilin said? He was lustful? It's okay. It's normal for you to like pretty girls at your age. Staya quickly comforted Bane when she saw that he was deep in thought. Bane was speechless. Wasn't it lustful to like pretty girls just because they were lustful? Yes, it's not surprising among human males. Don't mind it too much. According to Jilin's research, it was the instinct of human males to like pretty girls in front of them quickly. From Jilin's point of view, this was also the key reason why humans were really ahead of other species. It was because of this instinct of human males and their impulsive characteristics that led to the rapid reproduction of humans. That was why they could reach such a terrifying population, leaving other species far behind and occupying this continent. Then, what is love? Bane actually asked such a strange question seriously. Love? That's just a beautiful lie made by pretentious humans for the sake of reproduction. Jilin quickly came to this conclusion based on the logic just now. He didn't believe that such a tiny human would have such beautiful feelings that even he couldn't understand. Shield of Oath, righteous charge. Suddenly, a white light flashed. Staya had already taken out the Shield of Oath and rushed towards Jilin at an extremely fast speed. Looking at her momentum, she could definitely send a muscular man flying. What are you doing? Jilin raised one of his hands in front of his body. He was still sitting on the ground, waiting for Staya to crash into him. After the Shield of Oath collided with one of Crimson Lin's hands, a loud bang was heard. In an instant, the sound actually covered the sound of the machines. The holy light instantly dissipated, and Staya was sent flying back 3 meters. Crimson Lin did not move at all after Staya stabilized herself. She didn't care about Jilin. Instead, she shook her slightly painful hands and said to Bane in a serious tone, Some people say that people who are born in this world are destined to suffer. Everyone's life can be compared to moving forward with a heavy burden in the dark night without any light. In that case, true love should be a ray of light in each other's pitch-black life. Although it's insignificant, it's enough to illuminate each other's entire life. It makes people feel that it's because of you that I have some expectations for this hopeless world. It's because of your birth that I have a good impression of this world. How noble! Bane exclaimed. Are you for real? Chi Lin asked. What a hypocrite, Aisha said in disdain. Everyone, excuse me for a moment, the Dwarf King said. To be honest, when Staya attacked Crimson Lin without saying a word, he was really shocked. However, when Crimson Lin blocked the attack, he was really frightened. Although he guessed that Jilin wasn't an ordinary person, the attack just now was still far beyond the Dwarf King's expectations. It's been a long time since someone could block the attack of a diamond-level person so easily. If it's possible, can you let my people go with you to Morag? The Dwarf King said. Bane's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. What are you going to do? Sure enough, it brought back Aisha's bad memories. Her tone became a lot stiffer. To be honest, my dwarf clan has been disappearing in the Snow Wind Empire recently. They all have one thing in common, and that is they are all skilled craftsmen of my dwarf clan. So I suspect that there's some force that I don't know about that took them away to achieve their own goals. So I used the dwarf clan's intelligence network to scout for information. It can be said that no clues in the Snow Wind Empire could escape my eyes, but I didn't find anything. Now, there's only Morag that's hidden in the Snow Wind Empire. I don't have any informants. If it's really as I thought, my people were taken away, then they can only be in Morag. But until now, I still don't know its exact location. The Dwarf King said. I seem to have heard of this before. The folklore of the Snow Wind Empire is that the god of forging wants to create a weapon that could defeat the gods. So he took away those master craftsmen. Aisha said halfway, and her voice gradually became softer. She saw that the Dwarf King's eyes were about to spit out flames. If you can help me save my people, I swear I will gather the power of the entire dwarf clan and create a weapon that can satisfy you. The Dwarf King walked to Jilin's side and said in a deep voice. Even though Jilin was sitting on the ground, he could still look at the Dwarf King. But even so, he still stood up and said seriously, Okay. Chapter 28. Thank you for your help. The entire dwarf race will remember it. The Dwarf King lowered his head and bowed to Jilin. As a king, this was already the most respectful gesture that he could make. It's okay, it's just a deal. I just hope that you won't regret it when the time comes. Jilin waved his hand and said to the Dwarf King with a smile, but that smile was filled with a little treachery when a plot succeeded. What he wanted was not a weapon in human form, because that would not help him at all. What would the Dwarf King's expression be when he knew that he was going to build a skyscraper-like weapon? It was probably what the humans meant when they said that he would want to cry, but have no tears, Jilin thought. I should have known that he was only interested in gold coins and everything that could be exchanged for gold coins. Aisha thought angrily. Then I'll go and prepare. When do we leave? The Dwarf King said. Jilin looked at Aisha. The afternoon of the day after tomorrow. Don't bring too many people. We can't bring too many people with us. Aisha said. But if we really find my people, how do we bring them back? The Dwarf King asked worriedly. You don't have to worry about this. Aisha had an unfathomable look on her face. From here to the underground secret room of the Duke's mansion, they needed to use the teleportation circle, but if they came back from Morag, it would not be necessary. Well, I hope you don't disappoint me. The Dwarf King understood that Aisha already had a countermeasure, but it was clear that Aisha was not willing to explain in detail, so the Dwarf King could only say so. He had also heard about the problem of witches. The Dwarf Kingdom's spies all over the Snow Wind Empire was not something that happened in recent decades. Then, I'll see you in the afternoon of the day after tomorrow. The Dwarf King said this sentence and turned around to leave. What are you going to do? Find a client and kill him directly? Jilin asked Aisha. If it was said that it wasn't worth it to travel such a long distance before, now it had become a matter of taking advantage of the situation and lifting one's hand. Of course, Jilin didn't mind helping the Dwarf King save his people while helping Aisha kill some creatures. Aisha still had that much face. After all, they had been together for such a long time. Aisha had already achieved her goal, but for some reason, she was still angry. I don't think it's a good idea to kill her directly. Perhaps she has her own difficulties. Bane was a little hesitant. He did not doubt the possibility of Jilin killing Gina at all. How fierce was Bai Schweb back then? A Tier 8 monster went berserk and fought a Tier 9 Staya head-on. Logically speaking, White Snow should have lost all rationality at that time. She should have killed everything in her path regardless of whether she could defeat it or not. However, she didn't dare to get up after being stepped on by Jilin. She lay on the ground and pretended to be dead for a long time. Now that Jilin said that he wanted to kill Gina, Bane felt that Gina would definitely die. It was already a compliment to say that it was killing a chicken with a sledgehammer. However, he still couldn't bear it in his heart. Are you done? Are you done yet? Aisha was finally ignited by Bane's indecisiveness. Did you forget how scared you were when you were in the secret room? It was as if the sky had collapsed. You were soft-hearted now. If it wasn't for me, you would have died. Besides, what does it have to do with me, whether she has her own difficulties or not? Do you think you can trick me just because you have difficulties? Who doesn't have difficulties in this world? That's right. You can't use your own difficulties as a reason to hurt others. It was rare for Staya to stand on the side of Aisha. So, we'll just kill him? Crimson Lynn asked with uncertainty. It depends on your mood when the time comes, Aisha said. Bane was speechless. No one had any objections. They all knew that no matter what decision Jilin made, they couldn't stop it. Jilin looked at Bane's expression and made up his mind. It would be easier to just kill her directly. Unless the human didn't move and let him catch her, then he could spare her life. The only human that a dragon would spend a lot of effort to catch alive was the princess, and a dragon only needed to catch one princess. Let's go. I'll take you to find a place to stay. Staya saw that the matter was settled and wanted to leave with Aisha. As for Bane, he obviously didn't have the mood now. Aisha actually left with Staya without saying a word. Jilin sat in front of the new stove and heated it until it was red. He could feel that this one was much stronger than the previous one. Bane sat not far from Jilin and looked at the bustling dwarfs below. Catch. After a while, Jilin casually drew a space crack and took out a black thing and threw it to Bane. Bane caught it and looked at it. It was a piece of meat half the size of a human head, exuding a strong meat aroma. Bane's stomach suddenly growled. Bane just remembered that he hadn't eaten for a whole night. Bane turned his head and looked at Jilin. He saw that Jilin took out a huge pig leg, held it with one hand and chewed. This is the top delicacy of the dwarfs, roasted tusk pork. Try it. It's not worse than your human food at all, Jilin said. Bane carefully tasted it and then wolfed it down. Indeed, the fat of the meat was distributed very evenly, just right. After being roasted by the dwarfs, it was fat but not greasy, lean but not dry. Every time he chewed, his mouth was full of primitive and wild meat aroma. It was really not inferior to any human delicacy. Am I a strange person? Bane quickly finished the meat in his hand, then took a long breath and asked, in my opinion, all humans are very strange. They think too much in a day. So many people do a lot of things that can't be explained by reason. There are even people who jump into boiling oil. You're nothing at all. Aisha thinks that you are so soft-hearted because you covet her beauty. That's because she was temporarily blinded by anger and made such a judgment. I know that you have clearly realized that there is no special relationship between you two, but you still don't want the human who betrayed you to die. You are soft-hearted because the other party is a human like you. It is the instinct of all creatures to feel sorry for the death of their kind. Normal humans will feel sad about the death of their own kind. If they can help the other party, they will not hesitate to help, and when they want to kill the other party, they will instinctively feel reluctant. Your reaction can only show that you are still a clean and kind human, and you have not yet felt indifferent to the death of your own kind. But it's strange, why do humans use the phrase, the fox grieved for the death of their own kind, to describe feeling sad about the death of their own kind? When I first heard Staya say this, I thought it was saying that the fox knows that the rabbits are all dead, so it feels sad about the coming days of starvation. Jilin wondered. Then why do so many humans die from killing each other? Bane ignored Jilin's ridicule of human rhetoric. He was not deeply involved in this area, but he was interested in Jilin's words. He had never killed anyone before, but he had seen many. He did not understand How could those people kill others so cleanly and without hesitation? Aisha was the same. We did not suffer any heavy losses. At most, Aisha felt that her intelligence was insulted, and she was frightened. So why did she have to kill everyone? That is because humans are also very cruel creatures. There are many creatures in this world that are smarter than humans, but they're not more complicated than humans. If you were to label the qualities of humans by color, kindness would be white, evil would be black, justice would be gold, and selfishness would be gray. Other creatures would at most be a combination of 2 or 3 colors. Humans, on the other hand, would probably be a chaotic existence of many colors. If you were to look closely, you would discover that they could be colorful as well. As such creatures, of course, you would feel that it was natural for them to hurt their own kind, but it shouldn't be strange for them to kill each other. But when I think about how there are billions of such complicated creatures on this continent, I actually feel a chill down my spine. Jilin said. Bane was silent. Jilin's words reminded him of the rainbow he saw in the village. At first glance, there were only 4 or 5 colors. Only by looking closely could one see the 7 colors clearly. Are humans really so complicated? Is it really harder to recognize a person's color than to see a rainbow? Every time he talked to Jilin, Bane would feel a great impact. All right, seeing that you are so kind and naive, and that you are a rare species, I promise you, as long as that human girl is captured, I will not hurt her. When the time comes, it will be up to you, okay? Jilin saw that Bane was still a little depressed, so he finally revealed his bottom line. Bane was speechless. Why did it feel like he was mocking him? But he didn't refute because he already got what he wanted the most, which was Jilin's promise. Daya didn't create an opportunity for him in vain, and Aisha didn't give it in vain. All of them knew that if Bane and Jilin were alone together, this would definitely be the end result. Aisha wanted to vent her anger, but she never explicitly said that she wanted to kill Gina in front of Jilin. Only Jilin thought that it would be troublesome, so he had this idea. Just kill her directly was also Jilin's suggestion. Under the tacit cooperation of the 3 of them, Jilin gave in, but it was only to the point of surrender your gun and don't kill. Hopefully, Gina would listen to him and surrender obediently. Bane hoped in his heart, but he knew that it might just be wishful thinking. Chapter 29. Snow-Blowing City. My lord, Morag's blade has been successfully obtained. In the magnificent hall, one could tell at a glance that he was an intelligence agent. He was bowing his head and reporting to the man under the lamp the most important matter of the organization at this time. Very good. It seems that things are going well. Duke Lawrence should still not know the true purpose of Morag's blade. Otherwise, we would not have succeeded so easily this time. The man did not look back, but was still looking at something with the help of the lamp. It's all thanks to my lord's wisdom and foresight. I thought it was just a casual move. Who would have thought that it would be done so easily? My lord is really able to see the big picture with just one small clue. The intelligence agent expressed his admiration for his lord without any reservation, or it could be said that he was flattering him. Come on, you are not my subordinate. There is no benefit in flattering me like this. In the end, we are all working for the Empire. We are all comrades. What we lack is nothing more than the size of our duties. You don't have to do this in the future. The man stopped the agent's flattering behavior without looking back. My lord is right. The agent's voice this time contained more sincerity and real admiration and recognition. The whole empire knew that his lord came from a poor family and had no strength or background. With his own strength, he became a minister in just a few decades. He also did not treat his subordinates with any arrogance. Such a person, neither arrogant nor discouraged by victory, was worthy of anyone's respect 2 days later. Is it okay to only take these 20 people? They are all the best of my dwarf race. The dwarf king brought the carefully selected dwarf warriors to the departure gathering place and asked Aisha. These 20 people could be said to be the strongest 20 warriors under his command. None of them was lower than the 8th order, but the dwarf king still had no confidence in his heart. After all, it was Morag. He had inquired about it for many years, but there was no news at all. Who would believe that there was no heavy guard in such a tightly sealed place? If the situation permitted, the Dwarf King would definitely send an army directly. Under the Dwarf King's expectant gaze, Aisha cruelly shook her head. No, this array can only transport 10 people. That is to say, including you, you can only take 5 people at most. It wasn't that Aisha couldn't arrange a bigger teleportation array, but Aisha didn't think it was necessary. If Jilin made a move, even these Tier 9 powerhouses, could only watch from the side, completely unable to get involved. What were so many people going to watch the show for? It's not like I can take your money. The Dwarf King felt that he was sending his brave warriors to their deaths. If things go south, it's more important to stay alive. As long as we know Morag's exact location, it'll be fine. We can figure it out later. The Dwarf King turned around and instructed his warriors. He did not care that Aisha was right beside him. Don't worry, I guarantee that none of them will be missing, Jilin said. In Jilin's eyes, these dwarves were important creatures that would be used to make weapons for him. He cherished them very much. According to human words, they are all talents. The Dwarf King was slightly relieved. He had already taken into account Jilin's unfathomable strength into account by letting these 6 warriors go. It seemed to be a good idea. Otherwise, which king would sacrifice the lives of his soldiers for nothing? Aren't you coming along? Jilin asked the Dwarf King. In his opinion, the Dwarf King's strength was not weaker than Stia's. At least he could protect himself. I also want to rescue my people personally, but as the Dwarf King, I can't just enter human territory. If I'm discovered, it'll be a serious diplomatic problem. The Dwarf King said. Oh, Jilin didn't really understand. Political issues were a domain that he still couldn't understand. Although Stia's words were clear and logical, in his opinion, it was just some childish house games. However, the humans were quite enthusiastic about it, and even forced other races to play with them. Just wait, I'll definitely bring your people back. When that time comes, you must give me a great sword, Jilin said as he walked into the magic array. It's a promise. The Dwarf King bowed his head and didn't get up for a long time. When he looked up again, there was no one there. In the secret chamber of the Duke's mansion, rows of warriors were quietly standing in formation. The entire space was filled with a murderous atmosphere. The air pressure was so heavy that people couldn't breathe smoothly. The elite warriors were just standing there, but people could feel the murderous aura coming from them. Duke Lawrence was sitting on the only chair in the room. The teleportation array was activated, and 10 people appeared out of thin air. As expected of Lady Aisha, using teleportation magic so skillfully and extravagantly. Even in the heyday of the witches, I don't think there's a second person who could do it. The Duke stood up and walked in front of Aisha. That's not necessarily true, Aisha said lightly. Your companions are truly a surprise for me. A dwarf, a human teenager, and a woman who doesn't want to reveal her true identity. The Duke looked at the companions that Aisha was so proud of. To be honest, the dwarves did surprise him, because they would definitely come in handy. He also didn't expect Aisha to be related to the dwarves. He always thought that Aisha was hostile to the dwarves. However, the other 2 humans were unfathomable. What made the Duke feel the most strange was that the forces in front of him didn't seem to be enough to make Aisha that crazy. At this time, Stia's face was covered with a delicate mask that the dwarves made for her. As the princess of the Saimai Empire, her face would definitely be known by the other nobles of the empire. For nobles like the Duke, he might not remember how many illegitimate children he had, but they would definitely remember Stia's appearance from the age of 5 to now. Because she was a saintess, at least before, and Stia's identity was obviously not suitable to be exposed now. Madam Aisha, let's be frank. We are only in the same industry, not partners. We can do this together, but we will do our own things. When the time comes, whether we succeed or fail, we will do our best and leave it to fate. No one can blame anyone. Is that okay? The Duke was disappointed with Aisha's strength, so he wanted to draw a line between them, so that when Aisha's people failed, he wouldn't be implicated. Being so direct was already considered unsightly for the Duke, but now that they were about to depart, the arrow on the bow had to be shot, and he really didn't have the time to waste on these empty words. Okay, I'm already being very moral by being frank. You just need to bring us to Morag. After that, we don't need the Duke to worry about us." Aisha agreed with a smile. The Duke didn't expect her to be so easygoing. "Okay, let's go." The Duke took the lead and walked out of the secret room. He entered a secret passage, and everyone followed. When they walked out of the secret passage, even Bane, who had been wandering around the Duke's mansion for days, didn't know where they were. He turned around and looked at the place they came out from. It was a mausoleum, and there were countless tombstones around. And the tomb they came out from had the words "Grandfather" Simel on the tombstone. Bane felt uncomfortable when he saw that, and couldn't help but ask, "Did you guys purposely build a fake tomb in this mausoleum to build a secret passage, or did you really dig up someone's tomb? What do you think?" The Duke smiled but didn't answer. Staya looked around and sighed. She gathered holy light in her right hand and waved it toward the sky. The holy light instantly turned into light spots and floated around the mausoleum. It looked like a group of white fireflies. "May the deceased rest in peace." Staya put her hands together and said softly with her head lowered. As Staya raised her head, the firefly-like holy light also extinguished. Staya turned around and followed everyone out of the mausoleum. Even though the situation was so tense, no one rushed Staya. Instead, they stood in the distance and quietly watched the scene until they saw Staya walking towards them. Everyone didn't say a word and continued to walk out of the mausoleum. Silence was the respect and silence of the living towards the deceased, and it was also a silent sigh for the passing of life. However, the deceased had already passed away, and the living were still alive. Only the Duke couldn't help but think, there's someone from the Church of Light in Aisha's team? If Aisha was only hostile towards the dwarves because they had replaced the position of the witches, then Aisha would definitely not give up on the Church of Light. The Duke had heard that Aisha wasn't just wandering around like a lonely ghost all these years. She had a big plan that no one knew about. The thought of revenge against the Church of Light had never faded from this legendary witch's mind. How could there be someone from the Church of Light in her team? Unless this team didn't belong to her, then who could make the witches and the people from the Church of Light live in peace? The Duke couldn't help but look at Jilin. An ordinary human youth's appearance was indeed very deceiving, because at this age, no matter how strong they were, it was easy for people to let their guard down. Outside the mausoleum, there's a team of cars waiting for them at the exit. The cars had the symbol of the Merchant Association, and they were parked there quietly, without any sound. It was eerie in front of the mausoleum. As everyone entered the car, the team started to move slowly in the night. They were moving towards the mysterious city. Morag. Chapter 30. In the vast expanse of white snow, a group of 7 to 8 carriages was silently advancing. The group was very big, but the sound it made was strangely very small. It was completely covered by the wind of the Snow Wind Empire. A normal carriage would never be like this. There was only one possibility to achieve this effect, and that was that every carriage had a magic array attached to it. The Duke could be said to have made full preparations for this operation. "Don't we need to leave someone outside to keep watch?" In one of the carriages, Bane asked his companion. Sitting in an unfamiliar car and moving forward without knowing the destination, it was indeed something that made one feel uneasy. Bane occasionally looked out of the window, trying to determine the position of his party, but not long after, he gave up. Outside was a vast expanse of white. As far as the eye could see, there were no buildings or signs. He was not a person of the Snow Wind Empire, so he could not determine his position and direction. If he were to walk on this snowy plain by himself, then he would be doomed to get lost and freeze to death in this snowstorm. No need. Jilin was always so confident. Jilin leaned on the carriage, holding a huge piece of meat in his hand, one bite after another. When he spoke to Bane, he still could not speak clearly. It seemed that after coming out from the dwarves, Jilin had been eating something. Bane thought, from the time he got on the carriage until now, the things that Jilin ate could probably fill 2 people to death, but his stomach did not bulge at all. "Do you eat?" "I don't know what kind of meat it is, but it's delicious." Jilin saw that Bane had been looking at him, so he tore the meat in his hand into 2 pieces and handed the unbitten side to Bane. Bane hurriedly shook his head. He looked at Jilin eating, and he was a little disgusted. We don't have the ability to identify the direction in the snowfield, so it's useless to look. Aisha said. Then why are you so steady? Bane asked. The four of them were naturally in the same carriage. Aisha had been sitting there motionlessly, and this was the first sentence she said after getting into the car. Staya didn't seem to be in a good mood when she came out of the cemetery. She probably felt bad for disturbing the rest of the deceased, so she kept mumbling something after she got into the car. Bane couldn't hear it clearly. Jilin, on the other hand, was very normal. He kept eating as if no one was around. Only Bane himself was restless, glancing around from time to time. Of course, because we all have the confidence to walk out of the snowfield, Aisha said. Bane thought it made sense. With Aisha's teleportation circle, even if the Duke left him in the snowfield or took him somewhere else, he wouldn't have to worry about not being able to escape. They were sitting comfortably in the carriage, but the dwarf brothers who came with them weren't as relaxed. There were a total of 6 of them, and one of them stayed in the carriage the whole time. The other 5 would run out of the carriage from time to time and catch up with them after a while. It was very tiring. They didn't forget the important task entrusted to them by the Dwarf King. The main purpose of this trip was to find the location of Lager the Devil. Bane was influenced by the other 3's attitude. Plus, the surrounding scenery was really boring. Looking at Jilin, who was sleeping after eating his fill, he gradually felt tired. He couldn't help but lean his head against the carriage. When he closed his eyes, he thought, I'll just close my eyes and rest for a while. After some time, the Duke came to Jilin's carriage and knocked on it lightly. Lady Aisha, from here on out, we'll have to walk. Okay, Aisha agreed. Then, Aisha looked at Jilin, who was sleeping soundly. She hesitated whether to wake him up or not. Aisha knew that dragons who were woken up would be very irritable. She knew this very well. Aisha looked at Staya, and Staya silently turned her head away. Aisha, who was in a dilemma, suddenly realized something even more terrifying. Ever since she met Jilin and turned him into a human, she had never seen Jilin sleeping. The dragon race seemed to be a sleepy race in human legends. It was normal for them to sleep for a few years, and quite a few of them could sleep for decades. And those who disturbed the Megalosaurus's sleep, except for the one who killed the dragon, didn't seem to have a good ending. Aisha thought to herself that it was hopeless to wait for Jilin to wake up naturally. At the same time, she made up her mind to wake Bane up. Bane, who accidentally fell asleep, felt someone shaking him. He opened his eyes and saw that it was Aisha. He couldn't help but feel a little strange. In Bane's mind, Staya was more suitable to wake him up. I accidentally fell asleep? How long have I been asleep? Bane rubbed his eyes and asked in a muffled voice. Get up, lower your voice, and get off the car. Aisha lowered her voice. Oh, okay. Bane thought something unexpected happened, so he didn't say anything. Master Aisha. The Duke knocked on the car again. This time, his voice was louder than before. What are you knocking for? Do you want to die? Aisha got off the car first and yelled at the Duke. The Duke's knock just now was like a knock on Aisha's heart. She was really scared. Aisha knew that the car's soundproofing was good. Tell your people to stay away, Aisha said to the Duke. At the same time, she put a magic crystal in the car. The Duke swallowed his saliva. If he wasn't wrong, Aisha put an extremely powerful magic crystal in the car. As for what kind of magic was engraved in it, he would only know when the magic exploded. Bane got off the car and saw that Aisha and the Duke were both there. It seemed like nothing had happened. He asked, What are you all doing here? Aren't you going to wake Jilin up? When he got off the car, Jilin was still sleeping soundly. Isn't that a bit too much? Staya noticed Aisha's magic crystal as soon as she got off the car. It's too light. I'm afraid that he won't feel it, Aisha said. Bane seemed to understand. Staya didn't say anything else. She remembered the scene when the royal magicians cast magic on Jilin. They were all top-level magicians who could cast level 7 or 8 magic instantly. Everyone was lying down behind a small hill about 1,000 meters away from the carriage. According to Staya, it was the most reliable shelter in the area. From everyone's point of view, the carriage was just a small black dot in the white sky. They didn't know why they were lying down, but the Duke kept telling them to lie down and not show their heads. The Duke looked at Aisha and felt goosebumps on his back. At that moment, the Duke had the illusion that the wind and snow had become warmer. Witches were indeed lunatics. They actually wanted to kill their companions in front of so many people without any hesitation. "Be careful," Aisha suddenly said. A huge magic circle rose from under the carriage and kept expanding until it covered the sky 200 meters above the carriage. An endless amount of elemental energy gathered around the carriage in a visible form. Blue water elements, white light elements, yellow earth elements. It was the fusion of elements that only witches could cast. The Duke was shocked. It was common knowledge in the continent that any magician could only control one element. But witches were different because they didn't directly control the elements. Instead, they drew magic circles and used the magic circles to gather the elements. That was why they could use all 6 basic elements. This fusion of elements was the ultimate explosive attack magic of witches. Summoning the 6 elements and causing them to collide violently within a certain range would result in a strong explosion. It was said that everything in the explosion range would be destroyed and nothing would be spared. She was so cruel to use such a deadly method. She wanted to turn everyone into ashes without leaving a corpse behind. Or was she trying to kill the chicken to warn the monkeys? What was she trying to warn me about? In this world of ice and snow, the Duke's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He thought that he was wrong to think that the young man was the leader of this team. But then again, how could someone like Aisha be under someone else's command? As a large amount of elements gathered, the fusion of elements finally exploded. There was no sound because the medium that transmitted the sound had been destroyed. Only a huge ball of light lit up. It was so bright that it looked like a colorful sun had fallen on the earth. It was so bright that people couldn't even open their eyes. The light kept changing, and it was colorful. The Duke knew that every change in color was a violent explosion of elemental energy. He didn't believe that anything could survive such an attack. Isn't this too much? Staya was shocked. She thought it was just a normal level 9 spell. She didn't expect it to be this. Bane was so shocked that his brain was in a mess. What was going on? Why did she use such a deadly method? He didn't see any conflicts between Aisha and Jilin. Although Bane was shocked by the scene in front of him, he was surprisingly calm because he knew that Jilin would be fine. Although he couldn't believe it himself, the light of the fusion of elements finally weakened until it completely disappeared. Everyone looked up, but they couldn't see anything in the explosion range. It was like the inside and outside of the explosion range were 2 different worlds. There was no damage on the outside, and even the snow on the ground didn't melt at all. However, there was nothing inside, and not even light existed. That was because the light elements in the area had been completely destroyed. They could only wait for the light element from the outside to fill in again. Chapter 31. Everyone looked at the space in silence. It was a strange scene of nothingness. The surrounding colors started to dye the space. That was the element reclaiming its territory. It was like a drop of ink in water. It slowly spread out in the water and finally dyed the water into its own color. The space slowly returned to normal. The ground returned to its original yellow color. The snow on the ground was no longer there. Suddenly, a golden light pillar appeared in the middle of the space. It was very eye-catching in the night. Everyone stared at it as if they had seen a ghost. The light pillar did not last for long. However, before everyone could breathe a sigh of relief, it lit up again. Then it flashed twice. What was that? Is that the effect of the fusion of elements? The Duke asked Aisha. Aisha ignored him. She and Staya knew that it was Jilin's original gaze. Looking at the state of the light pillar, they even imagined that Jilin woke up and looked at the sky and blinked. As Jilin woke up, the dragon pressure that he released unconsciously turned into a real hurricane. It spread in all directions. When it hit the hill that Aisha and the others were hiding, it even made a loud noise. The temperature also increased significantly. Although Aisha and the others were more than 1,000 meters away from Jilin for safety reasons, the snow around them still melted quickly. They did not know how high the temperature around Jilin was. Look, Luckily, we are far away. Otherwise, would you be able to withstand it? Aisha said to Bane with an "I saved your life" expression. Bane did not say anything. He admitted that he might not be able to withstand it. However, more importantly, he had never seen Aisha's smile so stiff. Yo, good morning. No one knew how Jilin got to the top of the hill. He lowered his head and looked at them. There was still a faint golden glow in his eyes. He smiled and greeted them. The moment Jilin spoke, everyone felt like they were hit in the heart. The Duke and his subordinates even subconsciously put their hands on their weapons. Aisha, what are you doing? Jilin stopped smiling and gritted his teeth. I'm just trying to wake you up. That magic is very troublesome. I don't want to. Aisha felt that her smile was a bit fake. Staya had already taken out her shield and stood in front of Bane. It was not to block Jilin, but to block the aftershock of Jilin's attack on Aisha. Jilin looked at Aisha for a long time. Aisha was still laughing at first, but cold sweat started appearing on her forehead. Don't use this next time. It hurts a little. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Jilin actually lightly brushed it off. What a good-tempered person. Bane said sincerely. He felt that if he was hit by magic while he was sleeping, he would be angry too. But look at Jilin, he didn't say anything. It was as if nothing happened. This was the demeanor of a strong person. This was the temperament of a master. Damn, is it just a little painful? Aisha blurted out. What do you mean? Jilin asked. Nothing. Let's go. Aisha changed the topic. Let's go. The Duke was a bit stunned. What kind of monster was this young man? In order not to alert the enemy, the Duke had decided to walk when they were approaching. But after witnessing Jilin's strength, he was no longer worried about alerting the enemy. Instead, he was worried about whether it was right to bring Jilin into Morag with him. He just wanted to create some trouble to lower the status of the dwarves in the Empire. He didn't want to flatten Morag. After all, it was the foundation of the Empire. Luckily, Aisha was only looking for someone to take revenge. It shouldn't cause too much of a commotion. You're too risky. Staya saw that everyone was hiding far away from them, so she whispered to Aisha. Why? Aisha said, Don't think that I can't tell. You just want to see the effect of your full power attack on Jilin. Staya said, Nonsense, you don't want to? Aisha didn't feel guilty at all. She even confidently asked. Staya was silent. Of course she wanted to, but as a knight, she never focused on attacking. That day in the Dwarf Kingdom, the charge she used on Jilin was almost her full power attack. Come here. The Duke casually summoned a subordinate. Sir, go back immediately and tell His Majesty that Aisha came to the Snow Wind Empire. At the same time, tell His Majesty that there's a very strong person among Aisha's companions. Even elemental fusion can't hurt him at all. Just in case, His Majesty can deal with it early. This is urgent. The Duke said softly. The Duke originally wanted to go to Morag to create some chaos. He wanted to take advantage of the chaos to cause some destruction and kill a few dwarves. Finally, he wanted to spread the news, and then he could slightly guide the discussion. At that time, it would be a major diplomatic incident. It would cause the dwarves to be estranged from the Wind-Moon Empire. But to the Empire, this was nothing. After so many years, the Empire could already independently research the technology of the Gods era. It was just that Jilin's strength made the Duke feel a huge threat. Jilin's strength was beyond the Duke's understanding. He hoped that he would really do what Aisha said and just find someone to take revenge. Otherwise, if Jilin lost control, the losses would be unimaginable. In the face of such a major threat, the Duke wisely gave up his original plan and stood on the side of his country. It was related to the foundation of the country. The status of the dwarves and his right to speak in the Empire were not important. Yes, my lord, the subordinate replied. Then, his figure flashed and disappeared from the spot. Jilin's eyes narrowed slightly. It was not because of the Duke's arrangement. After everyone saw his strength, they were all discussing with each other in various hidden ways. But it couldn't escape Jilin's ears. Jilin could hear it, but he didn't care. It was just like how humans wouldn't care about the thoughts of ants and all the schemes that ants thought were meaningless. What Jilin cared about was what Staya said. He knew that Aisha had wanted to do this to him for a long time. It should be after he said that he wouldn't kill her. She had this idea. Maybe this was what humans always said when you give her an inch and she wants a mile. It was just that Aisha was the most special in Jilin's eyes because she gave him a human body. This was really interesting. From a human's point of view, this world was really big and exciting. This gave Jilin a completely different experience. For this, he was willing to fulfill Aisha's little wish. He deliberately didn't dodge that magic. Dragons love to sleep, but they weren't pigs. How could he not notice such a violent magic? Lady Aisha, Morag is in front. Let's separate here. What do you think? After walking silently for a few hours in the wind and snow, the Duke, who had been walking in front of the group, stopped and asked. Aisha raised her head. As expected, there was a huge castle in front of them. The huge black castle itself violated all the aesthetics of humans. It was crooked and stood in the ice and snow. No matter how you looked at it, it was very eye-catching. Which one is it? Aisha asked, because in front of her, there were a total of 3 castles that looked exactly the same. None of them. The real Morag is behind these 3 castles. It's a building from the era of the gods. I don't know how it was buried underground. Only a small part of it is above ground. These 3 castles were built by the Empire to guard the place. It's called the Divine Fortress. The Duke said, Yes, I understand. If that's the case, then let's go our separate ways according to the plan. Aisha nodded. Jilin purposely looked at the Duke. He knew that the Duke's decision was to stand on the Empire's side. He was very cautious of him. This made Jilin feel strange. With the Duke's current position, he shouldn't be telling them the real location of Morag so honestly. If the Duke said that the castle in front of them was Morag, Jilin would feel that it was normal. As expected, no human was in existence that could be easily understood. The Duke obviously wanted to tell Jilin that these 3 castles were Morag. But he knew that Aisha was a very smart person and wouldn't believe such a childish lie. Then I'll go first. Good luck. The Duke said goodbye to Aisha and quickly led the group towards Morag. That look from Jilin just now made him a little nervous. Also, he had to quickly go to Morag and remind the people there to not provoke this monster. The Duke thought to himself, whoever they want, I'll give it to them. I'll just treat it as a sacrifice for the Empire. Compared to the foundation of the Empire, a person's life was insignificant. Just like how he didn't hesitate to give up his original goal for the Empire, that person should also give up their life for the Empire. This was what humans called righteousness. Chapter 32. On a vast and uninhabited snowy plain, 3 huge black fortresses stood abruptly. There were no roads around them, and no lights could be seen from outside the fortresses. They didn't look like human buildings, but more like 3 giant god soldiers that descended from the sky. Day after day, they looked into the distance and firmly guarded the important things behind them. What was strange was that these 3 huge warriors seemed to be taking a nap today and ignored the group of outsiders beneath their feet. Jilin and the others walked along the base of the castle wall. Why do I feel like this wall will fall down at any time, or a lot of people will rush out from inside and surround us? Bane said. As a professional thief, Bane felt that when you enter someone else's territory without permission, you should be sneaky and tiptoe, and not like now, walking forward as if there was no one around, no matter how strong you were. Therefore, Bane felt that following Jilin to do this kind of thing was very awkward from head to toe. It was simply an insult to the thief profession, and he was ashamed to face his ancestors. Whether the wall falls down or people surround us, we don't have to be afraid. Jilin said, That's not what I meant. Shouldn't we be more sneaky, to show respect to the owner? Like we're walking in our own home, okay? Bane expressed strong dissatisfaction with these people's unprofessional behavior. The thief profession has a long history. Even I have heard my father talk about it when I was young. But when thieves steal, they still have to maintain respect for the owner. This is something I have never heard of. Explain in detail. How do you respect others while stealing? Jilin said seriously. Was it because this person was in such a strange place that he would act like he cared so much about it? Bane said in his heart. First of all, If you do your work carefully, you can be highly focused and not leave any obvious clues, so naturally, you can show your superb skills. Bane could only insist. And then, Ji-Lin said. Aisha was shocked. Qi-Lin actually spoke to her. This was something that had never happened before. He would always listen to others when they were talking and wait for them to finish before deciding whether to talk to them or not. This was not because he was cold, but because he had no interest in most things. Let's put it this way, if someone loses something and the thief is just a small thief, the owner will feel that it was caused by his own carelessness and will be very regretful. But if it is a very skilled thief, the owner will think that it is because the thief's skills are too good and he can only admit defeat. That is to say, even if you steal, you have to steal until the thief is convinced. Bane said, That makes sense. Qi-Lin looked pensive as if he had just learned something new. So you really are a thief. Aisha said. The thief that Aisha was referring to wasn't the thief class, but the more traditional one. When they were in the Duke's mansion, Aisha had her suspicions. Bane's movements were indeed not like a normal thief's. My master said that our sect absorbs new things on the basis of tradition. This is called keeping pace with the times. This way we won't be eliminated. Also, my master also said that it is not a burden to have more skills in the martial arts world. Bane said, You are lying to yourselves, twisting words, and forcing logic. I remember that you are quite popular in your village, aren't you? You don't seem like a thief. Staya was a bit annoyed when she heard this. Clearly, Bane was saying good things, but he didn't use the right words. Rabbits don't eat the grass near their burrows. This is the rule. Bane said, You have rules. Staya said, Even thieves have rules. Nonsense. Outside of Morag. Lord Duke, I don't know why you are in such a hurry this time. What is it? A dwarf stood in front of the Duke and asked strangely. The Duke didn't bring many followers, and he looked a bit embarrassed. What was even stranger was that when he entered Morag, he removed all the guards along the way. This was indeed a bit strange. Ambassador Rocksteel, I won't beat around the bush with you. I didn't want to see you this time, but something happened, so I had to do this. The Duke said, Oh, what made the Duke go against your original intentions? Ambassador Rocksteel was a bit curious. I don't have time to explain. I know that no matter who stole my things, they will eventually bring them here. And Ambassador Rocksteel, you will definitely know who it is. I don't care what you want, as long as you tell me who it is and where it is. The Duke said. Ambassador Rocksteel didn't think that the Duke would be so direct without beating around the bush. This made him a bit unprepared. I didn't ask them to steal it. They're not my people. I have no right to tell you. Ambassador Rocksteel decided to be direct and said it himself. This matter concerns the survival of the Empire. Tell me, who is it? Where is it? The Duke stared at Rocksteel and said in a deep voice, his expression was as fierce as a lion about to bite someone. Impossible. Ambassador Rocksteel said lightly, but it was this kind of indifferent tone that gave people a feeling of firmness. Rocksteel thought to himself, do you think I'm scared? You just lost something and it concerns the survival of the Empire? I don't really care. I'm not a person of the Snowwind Empire. Moreover, how could Rocksteel hand over his meritorious subjects just because of the Duke's words, although they weren't his people? But in this way, how would he convince the people in the future who would be willing to work for him? Even if Morag is destroyed, you won't hesitate? The Duke said, What? Who can destroy Morag? What kind of joke is this? Do you know that for so many years, we have always been wandering around the periphery of the city, unable to get close to the core area? In order to get closer, I even tried to force my way through, but even inside, I couldn't damage it in the slightest by borrowing the Empire's strongest power. Now you're telling me that someone can destroy Morag? Do you think I will believe that? Rocksteel said, The person who stole my things sought the help of the legendary witch Aisha. Although she succeeded, in the process, she betrayed Aisha and her companions. Now Aisha brought a group of people here to find someone to take revenge. The Duke knew that he had to sacrifice some precious time to explain it clearly. So what? We have set up 8 fortresses around Morag. With this kind of powerful force, even if an army from another empire comes, they will not be able to return. Why would I care about a legendary witch? Rocksteel even thought it was a little ridiculous. Aisha's team had a human youth. When he was sleeping, Aisha used elemental fusion to sneak attack him, but when he woke up, he was unharmed. The Duke said, "Fuck your mother. You're also a person. Can't you have some face? How can you say this kind of lie?" Rocksteel directly cursed. Among the dwarves, even the intellectuals had a bad temper. The Duke didn't fly into a rage because of Rocksteel's rudeness, because he could understand Rocksteel's feelings. When Jilin stood on the hill above their heads, he also wanted to curse, but he didn't dare, so he just looked at Rocksteel seriously. "Is this true?" Rocksteel saw that the Duke didn't look like he was lying, and asked in disbelief. The Duke nodded. "The Snow Wind Empire also has a few legendary powerhouses. You say, can they resist elemental fusion?" Rocksteel asked. "They have not tried." The Duke said, "Then what do you say? Do you want our people to die?" Rocksteel said, "No, you just said that they're not your people, and obviously they're not my people." The Duke said, "But they're still on our side." Rocksteel said. The Duke paused for a moment and said, "Actually, there's no need to talk about this nonsense, right? You and I have already reached a consensus. There is no one else here, so let's not waste any more time. Now, every second we waste, that monster is one step closer to your Morag." Rocksteel was silent. Because the Duke was right, they had already reached a consensus. "Tell me, that person is now in Morag." The Duke said. Ambassador Rocksteel looked up at the Duke and nodded. Chapter 33. Morag. It's strange. There should be many people here, but we haven't seen anyone after so long. Staya was puzzled. They had already passed through the Fortress Godweapon's range and continued to move forward. They could already see the legendary city from afar. Indeed, just as the Duke said, they could only see a pointy roof-like thing standing alone outside the land. Its size had already surpassed most of the towers built by humans. It was hard to imagine how huge this building was. How magnificent was the era of gods. How magnificent was the battle between the humans and the gods that ruined all of this. However, Staya was obviously not talking about the huge roof, but the small houses built by humans in front of them. They sat between the Fortress God Weapon and Morag, scattered like stars in the sky. This should be the living and research facilities for the guards and researchers. They had already entered the enemy's nest, but they hadn't seen anyone. Well said. Jilin smiled at Staya, took a few steps forward, took a deep breath, and shouted, "Where is everyone? Is anyone here? Come out." Even Aisha lowered her head and covered her forehead, thinking that it was too much. As for Bane, he had already made up his mind. If someone came later, he would definitely not say that he was with them. What would happen if this spread out? Wouldn't his former colleagues have to change professions and become bandits? That would be really embarrassing. Who didn't know that thieves always looked down on bandits, thinking that they were too rough and didn't have any skills? Windmoon City Palace. "Your Majesty, there is an urgent report." A guard rushed into His Majesty's bedroom, knelt down, and said. It was already late at night, and the Iron Blood King was already asleep. He didn't say anything when he was suddenly disturbed by his subordinates. He just sat up from the bed silently, calmed himself down, and said, "Give it to me." He didn't ask, "What is it? Can't you tell me tomorrow? Why did you have to disturb my sleep?" Or something like that. The guard immediately presented the urgent report to His Majesty. He was obviously very familiar with the Iron Blood King's personality. "Call the Chief Secretary," the Iron Blood King said after reading the urgent report for a while. Yes, even though it was already late at night, Grand Secretary Bello still quickly appeared before the Emperor. "Your Majesty." The Grand Secretary knelt down to greet the Iron Blood King. "Get up." "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Look." The Iron Blood King walked in front of Bello and stuffed the urgent report into his hands. "Your Majesty, could this be the Red Calamity mentioned by the Saimai Empire?" The Grand Secretary's voice trembled slightly. "It should be," the Iron Blood King said. From the contents of the urgent report, Aisha's group of powerful youths could easily be linked to the Megalosaurus mentioned by the Saimai Empire. However, only His Majesty and the Prime Minister knew about the Red Disaster incident in the entire empire. His Majesty and the Prime Minister were the only ones who knew about the Red Disaster incident. His Majesty and the Prime Minister were all kept in the sacred city to prepare for the future war. Even His Majesty was sent back by the Middle Empire. Morag is related to the foundation of the empire. We can't afford to lose it. The Prime Minister first imagined the worst possible outcome to confirm what was most important. That's right. The Iron Blood King agreed. Then should we immediately light the beacon? Seek help from other countries? The Prime Minister suggested. There's no time. The Iron Blood King said, Your Majesty is right. After all, distant water cannot quench a present thirst. Your humble servant has lost his composure. Then mobilize the nearby army and swear to protect Morag with our lives. The Prime Minister said, It's no use. The Iron Blood King said, Your Majesty, our soldiers are all brave. With the addition of the fortress's divine weapons, I believe that even if we can't kill the Megalosaurus, we can still protect Morag. The Prime Minister said, That's too much of a loss. The Iron Blood King said, Then Your Majesty, what should we do? The Prime Minister asked. He knew that since His Majesty had rejected him so decisively, he must have already made up his mind. Legend. The Iron Blood King said, Your Majesty wants to send a legend? The Prime Minister said, Yes, but from the Duke's description, even a legend might not be able to defeat the Red Disaster. The Prime Minister said, Cities. Your Majesty wants to send a moving city at the same time as a legend. The Prime Minister was a bit uncertain. 2. Understood. Your humble servant will do it right away. Yes, be careful. The Prime Minister bowed to the Emperor and quickly left the palace. Contacting a legend and getting them to move 2 moving cities wasn't an easy task. Let my Snow Wind Empire test your limits for the humans. The Iron Blood King thought to himself. The palace guards saw the Prime Minister as a celestial being. They felt that it wasn't unreasonable for him to be able to reach his current position from a poor scholar. To be able to communicate so smoothly with His Majesty and quickly figure out His Majesty's intentions. He was definitely the best candidate for the Snow Wind Empire, because His Majesty only spoke a bit more to the other emperor's Morag. You're the one who stole my Morag's blade? What's your name? The Duke looked at the girl in front of him and asked awkwardly. Duke, my name is Kina. As for the Morag's blade, I've never heard of it. Kina said. Kina's heart was also very strange. Logically speaking, no matter how things developed, it shouldn't be her and the Duke confronting each other. This didn't conform to the unspoken rules when the big shots confronted each other. But no matter what, she couldn't admit to this. Actually, you don't have to lie to me, because I don't want to pursue this matter. You should know that now that you're standing in front of me, it means that things are very clear. It doesn't matter if you admit it or not. I'm not looking for you because of that thing. I don't even know what use that thing has. To me, it's only my grandfather's relic. In my house, my grandfather's relic is everywhere. So, I'm actually not angry at you. On the contrary, I admire you a bit. To be able to deceive Aisha, in my memory, I don't know who else could do it other than you. The Duke said. Kina was a bit confused. She didn't understand what the Duke was trying to do. But as far as I know, there are a lot of people who are better and smarter than you. They also don't dare to deceive Aisha because Aisha is a very vengeful person. She'll do anything to get revenge. Now that you've angered her, and she's brought a monster to find you. She's not far from us. I think she'll be here in the time it takes to talk. Ambassador Yin Gang and I agree that we don't have the ability to protect you. The Duke looked at Kina. You mean that I should surrender myself and walk to Aisha to be dealt with by her? Kina was so angry that she laughed. We can also send you there. I promise, if you can come back alive, I'll let bygones be bygones. The Empire will also give you a great merit. The Duke said, I'm also doing things for the Empire by deceiving Aisha. Since when would the Empire hand over its own people to the enemy? What about the Empire's reputation? Kina said, It's different this time. The Empire can't fight against the enemy this time. Handing you over is the wisest choice. I believe you'll be willing to sacrifice for the Empire. The Duke said, If I'm willing, it's called sacrifice. If I'm forced, it's called murder. Kina said, The result will be the same. The Duke said, Is this what they mean by cook the hound after the rabbit has been caught? And put the bow away after the birds have flown away? Kina said hatefully. Whatever you say. The Duke said. Just then, a loud voice came from afar. Where's the person? Is anyone there? Someone come out. There's no time. Come, tie her up. The Duke said hurriedly. Sir, there's a reason why I was chosen to carry out this kind of mission. It's not that easy to catch me. Kina obviously didn't have the intention to die for the Empire. She suddenly disappeared from where she was, and a shadow quickly flew into the distance. It was the move that she used to escape from Aisha's crystal bat. Then I'll also let you know that the Empire's Duke isn't something an ordinary person can do. After the Duke finished speaking, a violent aura spread out from his body. He was also a top expert. The Duke grabbed in the direction where Gina had disappeared. Gina was instantly pulled out of another space, as if she was being pulled by someone. She fell to the ground. How is that possible? Kina's face was full of disbelief. The Duke walked to Kina's side and pressed her shoulder to make sure she wouldn't run away. Then he said, You still have a choice. One is to be sent over by my people. 2 is to go by yourself. I suggest you choose the second option. That way, you can at least be more dignified. The Duke suggested, All right, ask Aisha to find me under the 6th fortress's god weapon. Kina was silent for a while and said, Okay, but don't try to play any tricks. The Duke also hoped that those people would stay away from Morag. At the same time, he didn't believe that Kina could escape from Jilin's eyes. So he agreed to Kina's request. I'll go check on them. You get ready too. The Duke said and walked out. He didn't want that monster to wait too long. Kina clenched her fists. She thought to herself, Since you're heartless, don't blame me for being unjust. Chapter 34. Ever since Jilin shouted those arrogant words, they had been standing in front of the house without moving. They were like the martial artists of the Middle Empire who stood in front of their enemy's house and didn't say much, waiting for the enemy to come out and die, full of murderous intent. They stood in the wind and snow, but they were more serious than the wind and snow. They really had the temperament, the aura, everything. At least, that was what Jilin thought. Aisha thought they were a bunch of stupid hunters waiting for the rabbit to run into a tree. Bane thought they were monkeys who had entered a tiger's den and were shouting loudly. However, the miraculous thing was that no matter if it was them or the dwarves, they all stood still and cooperated with Jilin to create a solemn atmosphere. Just when Aisha couldn't stand this stupid behavior and was about to do something, the Duke appeared in front of them. Lady Aisha, what are you all standing here for? The Duke couldn't help but ask. Just now, when he walked over, the situation had really given him a fright. What are you doing here? Aisha asked. I'm here to tell you that I've found the person you're looking for. The Duke said, Aha, that's rare. We didn't trouble the Duke, did we? How can the Duke be so kind? That makes us feel a little bad. Aisha said. Haha, Lady Aisha, what are you talking about? The Lawrence family and you have been friends for a long time. This is a small matter, not worth mentioning, not worth mentioning. The Duke said to Aisha in his mind as he said the standard words to her. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm afraid you'll run around in this city, and if you get hurt, it would be a great loss to the Empire. I can't bear the consequences. Otherwise, why would I be so worried and work so hard? Thank you very much. Where is he? Aisha said, Please come with me. The Duke said, Humans are so troublesome and hypocritical. They talk so much nonsense. Jilin thought. Everyone followed the Duke for a while. Soon, they arrived at a fortress. There was a white figure standing on top of the fortress. It was like a light in the darkness. Just as Bane thought, it was Gina. Lord Duke, Lady Aisha, you're here? Gina was the first to speak. She was standing on top of the castle, so naturally, she had already noticed their arrival. The Duke didn't say anything. He didn't expect Gina to wait for them so obediently. Long time no see. You really left a deep impression on me the last time we met. Aisha said, Lady Aisha, you flatter me. You are the one who is truly amazing. You can actually make the Empire give away their own people. Gina was on the island. Cut the crap. We witches are not cruel people. You can choose for yourself. Do you want to be an old granny, a frog, or some other green-skinned monster? Aisha said, The last two sound about the same, everyone thought. Lady Aisha, do you really think that I am waiting for my death by waiting for you here? You underestimate me too much. Gina said. Bane looked at Kina and thought that Qilin was right. Humans were really complicated. They were as colorful as a rainbow. However, the reason why a rainbow was beautiful was because of its distinct colors. Humans, on the other hand, were a mess. He had seen the pitiful Gina before. He had seen the Gina who was constantly striving for self-improvement. However, the current Gina left a deep impression on him. She was so aggressive and showed off her abilities. Give me 2 minutes, Bane said to Jilin. After seeing Jilin nod, Bane walked to the front of everyone. What do you mean by 2 clocks? Jilin saw Bane walking to the front. He turned around and asked Staya. Human's time unit. 1 minute is equivalent to 60 seconds. Staya said. Jilin still didn't understand. Do you know how to count? Just count to 120. Staya said helplessly. Jilin nodded to show that he understood. Miss Gina, Bane greeted. Bane, I'm sorry. Gina said. Jilin thought that the word sorry was really useful. It didn't have any practical meaning, but it could solve a lot of problems. The human who invented this word should be a very intelligent person. It could be said that he had solved a lot of human disputes. Bane shook his head and said, No need, Miss Gina. I can understand you. After all, we serve different masters. I don't blame you. I just want to advise you not to resist. Surrender. This is your best choice. You won't have a chance. If there is another choice, no one will surrender. No matter who the enemy is, the Empire, the witches, or even fate. Gina said. Gina, I know you are a gentle and kind girl. I knew it from the moment I saw you. I don't want to see you die. Come down. Bane shouted. Maybe this is karma. Those who betray others will be betrayed by others in the end. I betrayed you and was betrayed by the Empire. I brought this upon myself. Since this is the case, you can't blame me. Gina didn't care about Bane anymore and said to the Duke, What are you doing? The Duke shouted. He suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. Suddenly, the castle in front of them started to tremble like a human. If it was a human trembling, then there would be nothing to say. But if it was a huge monster trembling, then it was very scary. The ground around them started to shake, and a violent earthquake occurred. Yin Gang, how can she activate the fortress god weapon? The Duke shouted into the communicator. I don't know. I said she is not one of my people. I didn't expect this girl to be valued by Bello so much that he even gave her the activation crystal of the fortress god weapon. Yin Gang said, In this empire, if she was not one of his or the Duke's people, then she could only be one of Bello's people. Something seemed complicated, but it was so simple. Is there anything you don't know in a radius of dozens of miles? The Duke shouted. Ambassador Yin Gang had been stationed in Morag for so many years. With his prestige and skills, there was no one who disobeyed him, no matter if it was a dwarf or a human. It was reasonable to say that he should have already run this place like an iron bucket. It was polite to say that he was the local tyrant here. Every rock of the fortress god weapon began to move. It successfully broke the original unesthetic shape and became less like a castle. It was now more like a Rubik's Cube that was constantly being moved. No one knew what it looked like. Haha, it can't be stopped. Come and experience the power of the Empire's ultimate weapon. Gina shouted. Stop it. It's useless. Bane said loudly. You haven't seen the power of this weapon. I'm kindly reminding you. You should leave. Gina's words stopped abruptly because a golden-eyed young man suddenly appeared in front of her. His arm went through her chest. A large amount of blood gushed out from Gina's mouth. It flowed out from her nose and mouth and fell on Jilin's arm in front of her. It finally flowed to the ground. The only place that didn't move in the entire castle was the place where Gina and Jilin were standing. No, Jilin. Bane's pupils suddenly shrunk as he shouted meaninglessly. Staya couldn't help but shout out in shock. Aisha just looked at it with a heavy expression. She actually expected this scene. She even experienced it herself. Cough, 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 cough. Gina choked on her own blood. However, every time she coughed, it was accompanied by intense pain. The word heart-wrenching wasn't just an adjective for Gina. She couldn't help but extend her arm and wanted to support Jilin. However, Jilin saw her action and quickly retracted his arm and took 2 steps back. Gina, who lost her support, instantly fell to the ground and laid in a pool of blood. Jilin looked at her and vaporized the blood on his arm. He said, "Just now you said that even in front of fate, you wouldn't just wait for death? You're just a mere human. You really don't know how high the sky is and how thick the earth is. However, I originally wanted to listen to you more. However, I have an agreement with someone. Our race has always valued promises. It's a pity that I can't break my promise. Humans might be fighting against fate for their entire life." Gina said with difficulty, "The way I see it, most humans are just dissatisfied with their current lives and want to change it. Humans always exaggerate things like this. Fate is just like a huge circle. Humans spend their short lives walking on a small part of it. However, they think that they are moving forward in a straight line. That's just an illusion because the circle is too big. It's just like you live on a planet, but always think that you are on a huge flat land. Of course, you want to fight against fate. However, the sad thing is that humans will never know whether they are fighting against fate or fate makes you think that you're fighting against fate." Jilin said. Gina looked at the red-haired youth with difficulty. She didn't want to know who he was because she was about to die. She couldn't feel the pain in her chest anymore. Therefore, she didn't want to argue with him. She recovered to her most relaxed state. Naturally, she could see the stars in the sky. So beautiful. Such a bright starry sky. It's really rare. Gina said. The snow wind empire went through years of wind and snow. Even the sky during the day was hazy. Even the blazing sun was covered by the wind and snow, not to mention the gentle moon and stars. However, when the sacred flame Megalosaurus appeared, the wind and snow suddenly stopped. The clouds and mist dissipated and the stars appeared naturally. The starry sky has always been clear and magnificent. It's just that people's eyes are covered by the clouds and rain, so they can't see clearly. Jilin said. He was the sacred Megalosaurus, the highest level divine creature. It could even kill a god. He had always been at the highest level. Naturally, he wasn't afraid of the clouds covering his eyes. However, how could ordinary humans do it? Just by being blinded by a leaf, people couldn't see Mount Tai, not to mention the starry sky. I really wish I could take a few more glances at this beautiful starry sky. It seemed that humans didn't only have the arrogant delusion of fighting against fate and changing the world. They also occasionally had such simple wishes. She actually only thought about such a small matter as looking at the stars before she died. Jilin silently thought as he looked at Gina's corpse. Jilin raised his hand. A ball of flame ignited on Gina's body. In an instant, the corpse turned into green smoke and rose in spirals. Go to the starry sky and slowly look at it. I can still satisfy such a small matter as looking at the stars. Jilin said in his heart. Jilin jumped down from the top of the castle. Bane immediately rushed over with red eyes. This made Jilin think that he was related to Snow White. Why? Didn't you promise me that you would let me talk to her first? Bane asked frantically. Didn't you say that I would give you 2 minutes? Did I count wrongly? Jilin was also confused. Bane opened his mouth wide. He didn't react for a long time. Suddenly, 2 streams of tears flowed out from his red eyes. He let out a scream that didn't sound like a human. Did I count wrongly? Jilin looked at Staya. Sigh, that's not what I meant. In the future, if someone asks you to wait for 2 minutes, you can wait a little longer if you want. Staya shook her head lightly. The Fortress God weapon's transformation is complete. Entering attack mode. Ambassador Yingang's voice came from inside the Fortress God weapon. The Fortress God weapon had just completed its transformation when Jilin was on the way back. It didn't look like a castle anymore. It looked more like the legendary frost giant. It stood on the ground and was covered with hard rocks. It looked down at everyone. Its window-like eyes lit up with red lights. She's already dead. Why isn't this thing stopping? And why is it your voice? Duke asked. He was calm because he didn't expect Gina to survive. It was just that things were slightly out of control. Because I made this thing. Also, The Fortress God weapon can only be stopped by taking the activation crystal to the control room. The activation crystal should be in the control room now, Yin Gang said. Duke looked at the rock giant and asked, "How do we get in? I don't see any entrance." "If it's a war, your so-called entrance will become a fatal weakness. How could I not consider this? When the God weapon is in its battle form, all the entrances and exits will be hidden inside its body," Yin Gang said. He seemed very proud of his work. The Fortress God weapon raised its hand at Jilin and the others. A strong light gathered in its hand. A beam of light shot out from its palm toward everyone. It was the signature work of the dwarves, the magic cannon. However, it was magnified a few hundred times. "Be careful, Holy Wall." Steyr released one of the few large-scale defensive skills. A thick wall, made of holy light, appeared in front of everyone. There was a huge world tree carved on it. After the attack, the holy wall became very transparent. It looked like it would shatter with a light touch. Meteorite. A magic circle opened above the god weapon. A huge rock came out of it and smashed toward the god weapon. Giant hammer strike. The dwarves also attacked. At that moment, the giant hammers in their hands became huge. However, they still looked small in front of the god weapon. One of the god weapon's hands turned into a giant sword. With just one attack, it shattered the huge rock summoned by Aisha. Then it let the dwarves' attack fall on itself. The dwarves' attack didn't cause any obvious damage. Duke looked at the god weapon. If he wanted to settle this situation, he could only rely on the monster other than using other god weapons. Duke looked at Jilin. Jilin stood in front of Bane and looked at him quietly. Bane was lying on the ground. He clenched the snow with both hands and sobbed. Chapter 35. Why are you so sad? You haven't known each other for long, have you? I remember that humans have always been very indifferent to the death of their own kind, right? Jilin lowered his head and said. White and purple light flashed behind him from time to time, like gorgeous fireworks, beautiful and moving. But it would have been better if there wasn't that fortress divine weapon. I could have saved her. You. Why? So? Bane choked. Her death is not your responsibility. Not being able to save her doesn't mean that you killed her. Don't take everything on yourself. Erasing her was my judgment. Didn't you say a while ago that I would do as I see fit? This is my judgment. Jilin said. You said, as long as she surrendered, you wouldn't kill her. You said, when the time comes. It's up to me. Bane said, obviously, she didn't listen to what you said at all, and didn't intend to surrender. Jilin said, does this really make a difference to you? Bane shouted, yes. Jilin thought for a moment and said. Bane looked at Jilin blankly and threw the snow on his hand to the ground. It splashed into a beautiful snowflake and finally fell into the snow and disappeared. Bane took a deep breath and asked, where's her body? It's burned clean. Jilin said. Then, was she in pain when she died? Bane said, hey, don't underestimate me. Jilin said, if Jilin wanted to kill someone, he could completely make them lose consciousness or be paralyzed for various reasons before they felt any pain. It could be said to be extremely clean. Did she say anything? Bane said, is it important? Jilin said, after all, that was her last words in this world. That was her last trace in this world. I will never see her again. No one will ever see her again. Bane rambled incoherently. She left peacefully and beautifully, Jilin said. Beautiful. Bane's voice trembled slightly. Yes, it was miraculous. It was just the disappearance of a weak race that could be seen everywhere, but she really stunned me at that time. The black rock was covered in bright blood, and she was lying in the middle of the pool of blood, like a white rose that had withered in red wine. At that moment, she seemed to have released all of her light and released all of her life. The flow of time was only for that moment of youth, just like a flash in the pan, Jilin said in a low voice. His voice was gentle and calm, like the whispers of a devil beside one's ear. Bastard. Bane was like an enraged bull, roaring as he staggered forward, using all his strength to punch Jilin's face. After all, he was a level 2 adventurer. The strength of this punch was not to be underestimated. Jilin just stood there and did not move at all, but the rebounding force still easily broke Bane's wrist. Bane was sweating profusely from the pain, but he gritted his teeth and stubbornly refused to make a sound. He stared fiercely at Jilin. Jilin was a little confused. He did not know what was wrong with this human in front of him. If he did not restrain himself in time, he would be dead. But the only thought in Jilin's mind was, well, now all three of them have beaten me. The dragon race was very stingy. Just when Bane was hesitating whether to use his other hand to punch Jilin again, Staya was like a cannonball, lying on the ground, rushing the snow along the way and sliding to their side. Staya was shocked by the situation on Jilin's side. She was distracted and did not block the attack of the fortress's divine weapon in time, so she was blown away by the punch. Let's get rid of this thing first, and then take the dwarf away. This place seems a little strange. We should not stay for long, Staya reminded Jilin. These words were too modest. How could a castle come to life and attack them? How could they say that it was just a little strange? Okay, Jilin turned to look at Staya, then turned to look at Bane, and finally nodded. Jilin turned around and saw the gigantic creature that had been causing a ruckus. The divine weapon's left hand had turned into a gigantic sword and was swinging wildly in all directions. Every time it swung, it would set off a violent gale that swept up the snow on the ground and blew it into the distance. The right hand turned into a huge magic cannon, shooting into the air without stopping. Each energy bomb was the size of a small house. Of course, the divine weapon's attack was not without a target. Its target was Aisha, who was flying around on the broom. Judging from Aisha's counterattacks, she was still able to handle the attacks of the fortress's divine weapon with ease. This was the first time Jilin saw Aisha's broom. It was said that it was modeled after the legendary flying sword of the gods in the Middle Empire, but the witches refused to admit this. Jilin walked step by step towards the fortress's divine weapon. As he walked, his eyes began to shine with golden light, and his hair gradually turned red. In order not to hurt Bane, he restrained too much of his power. Jilin raised his head and looked at the fortress's divine weapon. He thought to himself, what is this? Humans were really creative. Although they were weak, they could always use their intelligence to do things that they could not do. Breaking through one's own limits seemed to be a common thing for humans. The fortress's divine weapon also noticed Jilin, a tiny creature. Although Jilin's body was tiny, it was not the case for the fortress's divine weapon. The divine weapon raised its huge sword and whizzed towards Jilin's head. It was like a human picking up a stone and throwing it at an ant. It made people feel that nothing unexpected would happen. However, the moment the giant sword reached Jilin's head, it came to an abrupt stop. From its rapid movement to its absolute stillness, there wasn't the slightest bit of delay. Jilin raised his hand and caught the sword. Using his current human body to do this, the scene was indeed very impactful. Warning, warning. The fortress's divine weapon wanted to retract its huge sword, but it could not do so because Jilin held it tightly. One could clearly see that the divine weapon wanted to lift the huge sword, but the sword did not move at all. This made the divine weapon look like a mortal robber who wanted to lift the sea-stabilizing needle. The celestial weapon tried twice and realized that it still couldn't retract its greatsword. Thus, it decisively raised its right hand and began to bombard Jilin. Every shot from the powerful magic cannon caused a violent explosion. The ground around Jilin quickly turned into deep craters. The snow evaporated, creating a huge fog that blocked everyone's sight. However, the divine weapon continued to bombard the same spot. Left hand cannot be retracted. Give up and change to the ultimate mode. A stiff voice came from inside the divine weapon. With a crack, the huge sword and the divine weapon's entire forearm fell off. At the same time, two huge rock wings extended from the divine weapon's back. The wings released a strong blue light. From afar, it looked like two blue wings of light had grown out of the divine weapon. The divine weapon rose from the ground to the sky. At the same time, its left hand turned into a magic energy cannon and flew around Jilin's position. At the same time, The two magic energy cannons fired continuously, causing the ground to be filled with electric sparks and smoke. However, a voice came from inside the divine weapon. Target not eliminated. Target not eliminated. The huge sword on the ground moved slightly at first. Then, it instantly turned into a black shadow and disappeared. Everyone hurriedly looked for the huge sword, but they could not find it, except for the divine weapon. Search for the target above. The divine weapon turned around at a speed that did not match its huge body. It was as if it was lying flat in the air, facing the sky. It raised the two magic energy cannons and continued to fire. As expected, Jilin was at an extremely high position above it, holding the huge sword that was many times bigger than it. Not bad, Jilin praised. So, Jilin pushed the huge sword and dove down against the rain of magic energy cannons. Its speed broke through the sound barrier and made a loud explosion. The front of the huge sword was faintly red. Every time the magic energy cannons hit the giant sword would be shortened by a small section and lose a small piece. When Jilin rushed to the front of the divine weapon, half of the huge sword in his hand was gone. Naturally, the remaining half of the blade was not sharp at all. However, Jilin held this huge broken sword and forcefully pierced through the divine weapon's chest. Then, the remaining force rushed back to the ground. Suddenly, the ground shook again. The divine weapon in the air had a big hole in its chest and back. It looked very miserable. Then, it trembled slightly and turned into a huge fireball in the sky, illuminating the whole of Morag. The resulting air waves made the Duke stagger. Jilin looked back at the huge fireball created by the explosion of the divine weapon and laughed softly. This star is not bad. It's big enough and bright enough. Small and pitiful human. Chapter 36. The huge fireball hovered above Morag, as if a small sun had fallen here, and the intense heat hit their faces. The body is damaged. It is determined that it cannot be repaired. It will self-destruct. The stiff mechanical voice sounded again. The voice disappeared, and suddenly there were two slight explosions from the fireball. The huge fireball bloomed and turned into countless small fireballs that fell in all directions. It was as if it had turned into a huge orange firework. Jilin looked at the extremely dazzling firework and finally turned around and walked towards Bane and the others. His steps were calm, and his eyes were emotionless. When Jilin walked in front of everyone, other than Aisha and Staya, the rest of them looked at Jilin as if they were looking at a monster, and they all kept a certain distance from Jilin. As for Bane, he didn't even look at him. Jilin nodded towards Aisha, and the general meaning was, I helped you with the matter. You don't have to be polite. Now it's my turn, right? Aisha nodded. Do. Aisha said. Lady Aisha, you are too polite. If you have anything to say, just say it. Although the Duke was already scared stiff, he still instinctively greeted Aisha politely and acted like a lackey. To be honest, we came this time to look for that girl, but we have a more important matter that we need your help with. Aisha also spoke very politely. However, the Duke didn't know how to respond to that. His heart was currently in a state of turmoil, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to describe it as a storm. The Duke thought to himself, I spent so much effort to clear all the obstacles for you and let you directly walk in front of the target. I even gave up my original plan. What was I after? I was afraid that the monster would go berserk here and destroy everything, causing unbearable damage. That's why I brought you back to the target, so that you could leave as soon as possible. But in the end, you guys have already caused your losses, yet you still haven't left. What's even more infuriating is that you still told me that it was just a matter of convenience. Convenience your sister. Just a matter of convenience, and my Snow Wind Empire lost a fortress divine weapon. Do you know how much manpower and resources are needed to make that thing? When the time comes, I may not be able to bear the responsibility of the king. The Duke cursed in his heart, but he didn't dare to show any dissatisfaction on his face. He took a deep breath and calmed himself down and said with a smile, I don't know what else Lady Aisha needs my help with. Just say it. However, even Bane felt that the smile on his face was very stiff. If that's the case, then I won't be polite with you. Aisha said. You'd better be polite, the Duke thought. The Dwarf King has asked us to bring all the dwarves here back to the Dwarf Kingdom, Aisha said. The Duke didn't say anything, because that would mean taking away more than half of the researchers in Morag, and the situation here was very complicated, so he couldn't make the decision. What's the matter, Lord Duke? Is there a problem? Aisha saw that the Duke's face was troubled. Lady Aisha, this matter is very important. I can't make the decision. The Duke said, I'm not asking for your opinion or consent right now. I'm just telling you to bring all the dwarves here. Crimson Lynn stepped forward and said. He was extremely impatient with the humans' red tape, but he heard that some humans thought that this was an important factor that differentiated them from other races. There were always people who said, what's the difference between humans and beasts? But there were also people who had a completely different view. They felt that humans were not necessarily better than beasts, so they said, after being with humans for a long time, I prefer to be with dogs. Jilin thought that they were of the same race, but their thoughts were so different. Haha, such a race wanted to be united the most. How ridiculous. If he really wanted all the humans to think in the same direction, he might as well think of a way to make a pig defeat him. Jilin looked at Staya, then at Aisha, and thought to himself, what do all the humans have in common? The desire for life? Those who hung themselves probably didn't think so. The yearning for love? Jilin thought that those hairless masters might say, Pink is just a skeleton, and some women might say, men are just pigs. The pursuit of fame and fortune? There seemed to be a lot of people who didn't care about fame and fortune. Damn, how could a dragon not understand a mere human? Why are you still here? Jilin said, his eyes starting to turn yellow again. No one knew why Jilin suddenly became irritated. The Duke decided to let him be for now. Ambassador Igan, can you hear me? The Duke walked towards Morag and contacted Igan. My divine weapon. Oh, there was a heart-wrenching scream from the communicator. Looks like it can be heard, the Duke thought. Then he decided to tell Igan something even more maddening. He said he wants to take all the dwarves with him. What? Why? What does the dwarves have to do with him? Igan said. He said he was asked by the king of the dwarves. The Duke said. Damn it. Why? He's too much, Igan said. The Duke didn't know whether Igan was talking about the king of the dwarves or Jilin, but it didn't matter. The Duke said, when you're under someone else's roof, you have to lower your head. Looking at that person's strength, it seems like it won't be a problem for him to destroy another 7 fortresses. Igan was silent for a while and said, ask all the dwarves to go. Okay, the Duke said. A wise man submits to circumstances. That's the wisdom of humans. Looks like Ambassador Igan learned well, the Duke thought. There were a total of 8 fortresses, and they formed a square with Morag in the middle. There was a circle of ordinary houses between Morag and the fortresses. When the Duke first entered Morag, he had evacuated everyone to other regions. Later on, when Jilin went to the 6th region, the Duke had everyone gather and move to the 2nd region, which was the opposite of the 6th region. It would be a bit troublesome to get to Jilin's side now. 20 minutes later, a group of dwarves stood in front of Jilin, no less than 400 or 500. Jilin was a bit impatient at first, but when he thought of everything that happened today, and considering the unreasonable nature of humans, Jilin decided to wait quietly. Just looking at these dwarves in front of him, Jilin didn't have any complaints in his heart. They were all talents. Everyone, I've been asked by the king of the dwarves to bring you home, Jilin said to the dwarves. What? Huh? The king has finally come to save us. Igan actually forced me to stay here. I swear I won't be human if I don't take revenge. Not bad, not bad. Who wants to go back to that dark underground? What's wrong with following Igan? Besides, although Igan caught you, he never mistreated you. Why are you so vengeful? Bah! As soon as Jilin's voice fell, the dwarves on the ground began to quarrel. 400 or 500 people quarreled, and it became a mess. It was easy for Jilin to kill these people, but difficult for Jilin to understand what they were saying. After a long time, Jilin roughly understood that these people were divided into 2 groups. One group wanted to stay, and the other wanted to go back to the Dwarven Kingdom. Jilin thought. So it wasn't just humans who had different ideas. Jilin scratched his head and looked at Aisha. Aisha met Jilin's gaze, and without hesitation, turned her head to the accompanying dwarves. "If you want to stay, then stay," said the leading dwarf. But other dwarves wanted to speak, but the leading dwarf raised his hand to stop them. The leading dwarf bowed to Jilin and said, "Thank you, benefactor." Jilin nodded and said to the dwarves, "If you want to go, then stay. If you don't want to go, then leave." At that time, more than 100 people turned and left. This was a bit out of Jilin's expectations. He thought that half of them would leave. Jilin looked at the dwarves who stayed with satisfaction, and his pride was beyond words. He said to Aisha, "How do we go?" Aisha stared at Jilin with her beautiful big eyes, as if she was surprised that Jilin would ask such a question. "What's wrong?" asked Staya. Aisha ignored Staya and said carefully to Jilin, "Didn't you fly back with them on your back? Hee. Do you want to die?" Chapter 37. Aisha saw Jilin's angry face and quickly changed her words. She raised her hands and said, "Just kidding, just kidding." "Huh." Jilin snorted and turned his head to the side. Aisha could only start to draw the magic circle silently. This was not part of her original plan. Staya looked at the god weapon wreckage on the ground and frowned. She was silent. Every time the weapons of mankind took a huge leap forward, it meant that more humans would be harmed, regardless of the original intention behind the creation of the weapons. Jilin saw Staya's expression and guessed what she was thinking. He chuckled and said, "It seems like all humans instinctively hate weapons. That's because we've been hurt by them." Staya sighed. "But you've never stopped making or researching weapons," Jilin said. "It's necessary," Staya said. "That's right, because humans need to survive. You're weak, so you need weapons to protect yourself. You need a sense of security. But no matter how powerful the humans' weapons are, you'll never be satisfied," Jilin said. "Why?" Staya said. "How can a race that can't even trust their own kind have a sense of security?" Jilin said. "You?" Staya wanted to refute, but she didn't know where to start. She couldn't tell Jilin that although humans looked the same, they had more detailed classifications. Just like the elves, there were light elves, water elves, dark elves, and so on. But the difference was that the light elves and dark elves could live together harmoniously in the elven race. But the humans of the High Mountain race would never think that the water elves were the same race as them. Most of the time, those who were not of the same race were not of the dwarves or beastmen. It was of the other races. This was normal in the eyes of humans, but it wouldn't make sense to Jilin. Actually, you know that humans have the absolute advantage on this continent. The other races are nothing to be afraid of. So, humans have been targeting their own race for a long time. They're really a race that likes to find trouble for themselves. But then again, if humans stopped fighting, how boring would the world be? It would be like a calm water surface without a single ripple. Don't you think so? Jilin sighed. Yes, my ass. A peaceful world where there are no conflicts and people are free of worries. It is called heaven in the light doctrine, Staya said. Then heaven is indeed very boring. No wonder so many people are bent on going to hell. Is a church of light really leading people to do good? Why do I feel that hell is more attractive than heaven? Jilin looked at Staya. The megalosaurus is a creature from hell. Of course, you wouldn't understand the human's yearning for heaven. Staya started to attack him personally. Who said that? Jilin asked. The sacred book of light said that the megalosaurus spread its wings from the deepest part of hell. It carried flames and black mist all the way up. It finally cracked the earth and came to the human world. It brought endless disasters and pain to the human world. Staya held the sacred book of light and was very familiar with the doctrine. The god of light is so stingy. Jilin was stunned and muttered to himself. Don't insult the god of light, Staya said coldly. She even took out the hammer of victory. Don't worship the god too much. Trust me, Staya, just treat it as a memory. No matter what difficulties you face, no matter how much you pray to the god, you have to solve it yourself, Jilin said. Of course you have to rely on yourself, because all the suffering is a test from the god. We don't ask for the god's help. We only hope to gain faith and courage from the god, Staya said righteously. All the suffering is from the god? Then don't you want to kill him? Jilin said. Yeah. Staya raised the hammer of victory and wanted to smash it on Jilin's head. But Jilin grabbed it. No matter how much Staya struggled, she couldn't move at all. Actually, what you said makes sense. You just need to gain courage from a god. Actually, you don't really want the god's help. If the god really shows up to help people, the first thing that people will feel is not gratitude, but fear, Jilin said. How can that be? Staya said. Trust me, if the people of the Church of Light find out that the God of Light is really standing in their church one day, then, no matter if it's the god or the people, both sides won't be happy. Jilin pushed Staya out and walked into the magic circle that Aisha had already drawn. Nonsense! Why should I believe you? Staya shouted. That's because the times have changed. How can you say that it's nonsense? In the words of you humans, this is called the lesson of history, right? Jilin said. Okay, everyone pay attention. Go in 10 by 10. Don't push. Let's teleport. Aisha activated the magic circle. The Duke stood by the window and looked at where the divine weapon number 6 used to be. After a while, he let out a sigh of relief and said to Yin Gang behind the table, Finally, they left. Yin Gang used his thumb to rub his swollen eyebrows and said, The loss this time is quite heavy. It's much lighter than I expected, the Duke said. You think? I don't know what His Majesty is thinking. The loss of the divine weapon isn't much, but the 300 researchers who spent so much effort over the years are gone just like that, Sai. Yin Gang was a bit heartbroken. His Majesty thinks that the two of you being able to protect Morag without suffering any losses is a great merit. As for those researchers and fortresses, His Majesty doesn't think they're worth mentioning. A voice suddenly came from outside the door. The owner of the voice pushed the door open and entered by himself. Secretary Bello, why are you here? Yin Gang stood up and said in surprise. The Duke looked at the person who came in with a dark expression and was in a bad mood. He said, Nonsense, even to you His Majesty wouldn't say so much. Bello didn't care about the Duke's attitude at all. He smiled and said, Anyway, that's what His Majesty meant. The Duke didn't want to waste any more time and directly asked, You came here personally and so quickly. What is the meaning of this? I came to confirm the situation, estimate the enemy's strength, and prepare for what's next, Bello said. What's next? The Duke asked. Although he didn't want to admit it, but Secretary Bello could be said to be second only to one in the Snow Wind Empire. For such a person to come here personally, it definitely wasn't for such a small matter. Someone touched his reverse scale, so His Majesty naturally wants to take revenge. Although His Majesty doesn't speak much, he definitely isn't someone who will swallow his anger. Even when Secretary Bello said to take revenge, he still maintained a warm smile on his face, showing the excellent self-restraint of a noble. But the Duke didn't think so. He only felt that this smile was fake, real, fake, and very annoying. As a true noble, the Duke was naturally very unhappy when he saw that the child of a poor family was more noble than a true noble. I'm afraid it won't be that easy. Yin Gang muttered. That's right, in that group, there's a female knight from the Church of Light that can block the attack of the Fortress Divine Weapon. Also, from the teleportation circle that Lady Aisha used, the rumor that the Dark Scripture is in her hands seems to be true. Sigh, this actually doesn't count for much. The main thing is that monster called Jilin. He's too terrifying. Moreover, they've already brought more than 300 dwarves back to the Dwarf Kingdom. We don't know the dwarves' attitude right now, so rashly going there is indeed a bit reckless. The Duke said, His Majesty has already made up his mind, and in my opinion, there's still a chance of success. Bello said, You haven't seen it with your own eyes, so you won't understand. The Duke said, His Majesty also thinks so. Bello said, What do you mean? The Duke suddenly became nervous. His Majesty wants to personally see the monster you speak of. Bello said, No, that's too dangerous. Why didn't you stop His Majesty? You don't know how terrifying that monster is. The Duke was furious. I said, His Majesty has already made up his mind. Bello said. The Duke sighed in despair. This generation's Iron Blood King's decision had indeed never changed. With his heart in a mess, the Duke said, "When you left Wind Moon City, did His Majesty appoint a crown prince? You're going too far." Secretary Bellows' face darkened. Chapter 38. It is indeed a bit disgraceful. Even if His Majesty is your relative, you can't say that. The Rocksteel Duke said softly. The Duke's expression kept changing. In the end, he clenched his teeth and asked, "Do the ministers want to change the world?" Impudent. Grand Secretary Bellows' forehead instantly turned red. He could no longer maintain his usual aristocratic demeanor because he really didn't have any experience. He had been unhindered in the Snow Wind Empire for dozens of years, but this was the first time someone said such shameful words to his face. After the Duke saw Bellows' expression, he ignored Bellows' murderous gaze and let out a long sigh of relief. He then said, "It's good that it's not. It's good that it's not. Duke, be careful with your words. Seeing that you have been away from His Majesty for a long time and are thinking for His Majesty, I will pretend that I didn't hear it this time." The Duke forcefully swallowed his anger and said, at the same time, he praised in his heart, "His Majesty made a wise decision to exclude this blabbermouth guy from the center of power. Since no one wants to change the Emperor, why don't you stop it? If His Majesty were to appear in front of that monster, the odds would be against him. Have you heard of nailing someone to the pillar of shame in history? At that time, none of us will be able to escape." The Duke didn't care about Bellows' warning. Bellow looked at the Duke and didn't say anything. After a while, he walked behind a Rocksteel Duke's table and pushed him aside. He then searched around. "Where's your gun?" Don't. The Rocksteel Duke quickly stopped him. "Who are you trying to scare? Isn't persuading the Emperor something that you should do? Normally, you even care about His Majesty's trivial matters. Why can't you do it at the crucial moment? You just going to watch His Majesty fall into danger?" The Duke straightened his neck and said, "His Majesty thinks that no matter how powerful the enemy is, as long as they dare to invade our Snow Wind Empire, they will not let it go. Moreover, such a powerful thing running around the Empire without any restrictions is a hidden danger." Bellows said methodically, "But His Majesty doesn't need to go personally." The Duke said, "His Majesty is determined to see the true strength of that monster." Bellows said, "It's too dangerous. What did you tell His Majesty?" The Duke was getting anxious. "His Majesty didn't allow us to talk about it." Bellows was silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed and said, "His Majesty received your message last night. This morning, he gathered all the ministers to discuss this matter. His Majesty pointed at General Chi Feng and said, 'Tell me about it.' Just as General Chi Feng said that they should wait and see, His Majesty raised his hand and said, 'Hmm.' Then he pointed at General Chi Feng's rival, General Fei Hu, and said, 'Speak.' General Fei Hu naturally said that he should immediately send troops to encircle and suppress something. Then His Majesty said, 'Not bad, approved.' After that, the lords asked, 'Who will be the general?' His Majesty said, 'I will go in person.' At that time, of course, everyone was unanimously against it. That was what one would call a boiling cauldron of voices and indignation. The Duke described the scene vividly, and even now, it seemed that he still had lingering memories of it. Why do I feel like Mr. Bellow, who was the Grand Secretary, was enjoying the show? The Duke asked. Nonsense, there's no such thing. Bellow naturally wouldn't say that he would never go against His Majesty's wishes no matter what. Unfortunately, His Majesty didn't care about anyone. He just kept watching the crowd's indignation until everyone calmed down. Then His Majesty left. This doesn't seem to be a big rule. Isn't this arbitrary? The Duke was a little puzzled. You don't know. These years, His Majesty's words carry enormous weight in the Empire. Others don't dare to disobey him in the slightest. Either His Majesty doesn't express his opinion, or everyone listens to His Majesty. Fortunately, His Majesty hasn't done many things like this in the past few years. Bellows said, "All right, then tell me, why did His Majesty see the other party's true strength?" The Duke had already accepted his fate. He had already realized that there was no changing the fact that His Majesty personally led the troops in a battle. He could only hope that His Majesty's garrison strength would exceed his expectations. All the legendary experts in the Wind-Moon Empire. Bello said. It seems that His Majesty didn't underestimate his opponent. The Duke agreed. 20,000 elite soldiers. Duke Bello said. If the other party's goal isn't to completely destroy these 20,000 soldiers, it shouldn't be of much use. Besides, we don't have the ability of Nanshin Kingdom. The Duke said. Even so, His Majesty is the Emperor. He must have the cards that he should have. Bello said. Haha. The Duke was clearly a little disdainful. He thought to himself, when you're beaten to a pulp, I'll see if you still want to have the cards. Anyway, when he saw that monster destroy the Fortress God weapon in one go, he didn't have the heart to think about these things. 2 moving cities. Chief Secretary Bello said. What? Is this true? The Duke's eyes bulged. Bello nodded. In that case, His Majesty should be fine. The Duke let out a long sigh, causing his figure to look a little shorter. After coming back to his senses, he asked, Has the Empire developed so quickly these years? Do the dwarves really have such great help? Bello stood proudly and cupped his hands. His Majesty is wise and mighty. The Duke was silent for a long time and also cupped his hands to Bello. That's true. It wasn't until this moment that the Duke completely erased the original plan in his heart. And the Simi Empire and the Middle Empire both sent troops to help. It's just that because of the distance, only a small number of elites came. The Nanshin Kingdom also didn't have time to send people over because it's too far away. The Holy Dragon Empire seems to have some difficulties, so let's not talk about it. Bello said. The Duke sucked in a breath of cold air. The 3 empires acting together was a grand occasion that hadn't happened for many years. But the Duke instantly thought of the reason why this was a grand occasion. He hurriedly asked, We allowed the armies of other countries to enter our hinterland. What if they're up to no good? Then Bello raised his hand and said, Don't worry. Although the Duke was a little puzzled that Bello spoke so decisively, he decided not to get to the bottom of it. For such a big matter, who would dare to say such a thing without absolute certainty? Is there more? The Duke asked. Duke, don't you think it's enough? Bello was a little surprised. It should be known that the power he had mentioned earlier, if it had been a few decades ago, even the entire country would not have been able to produce it. But it seemed that the Duke still thought it was not safe enough. Sigh, logically speaking, it should be enough. But I'm still a little worried. Let me ask, what if we can't beat them? The Duke said. Bello pondered for a moment and said, If we can't beat them, if there really is an enemy with that kind of power, then naturally it's not up to you and me to worry. But if it's up to me, we did our best and didn't underestimate the enemy. If we still lose, then it can only be said that our skills are not as good as theirs. We can only accept it. At that time, we can only pledge our lives to protect His Majesty. The Duke cupped his hands again. That's true. Bello smiled and nodded. Damn it. The Duke suddenly cursed and pointed at Bello's nose. I almost forgot. Look at you. You asked someone to steal from my family, so you stole it. If you couldn't steal it, then you put down your pride and asked for it. Why did you have to put up a mission at the Adventurers Guild? Such an unlucky thing came out. How troublesome is this? You have a lot of responsibility for this. Bello was a little dumbfounded. The Duke's ability to change his face was a little too perfect. He could only smile and say, That's reasonable. But let's talk about it in the future. Let's talk about it in the future. The Duke also understood that the time was not right, so he didn't bother. In fact, what he said just now was more to give Cabinet Secretary Bello a way out. At their level, no matter how big the private matter was, it didn't count as much on the surface. Suddenly, the ground shook and a rumbling sound rang out. At first, the Duke thought that it was the snow on the mountain in the distance sliding down, so he didn't pay much attention to it. Avalanches were too common in the Snow-Wind Empire, but the sound was getting louder and louder until it was deafening. The Duke hurried to the window, but a huge shadow covered him. He couldn't see anything clearly, because the shadow also covered the entire Morag. The moving city descended in front of Morag. The divine weapon that made Bane think it was a castle was not worth mentioning in front of the moving city. It was really the light of a grain of rice, competing with the brightness of the moon. A moving giant city crossing the mountains and arriving in front of you. Anyone who saw it would be dumbfounded. This is the Empire's strongest weapon, a moving city that can accommodate millions of people. What do you think, Duke? Do we still need to worry about what if? Bellows said proudly. The Duke recovered from the shock. Hearing Bellows' question, he looked at the miraculous moving city in front of him and thought about the power of elemental fusion. He pondered for a moment. It's hard to say. Chapter 39. The Kingdom of the Dwarves. It had been 4 days since Jilin and his party returned from Morag. The dwarves, from top to bottom, were all jubilant. They welcomed their returning compatriots with the greatest enthusiasm and the most luxurious banquet, as well as Aisha and others who had helped the dwarves. When they learned that all the missing dwarves were secretly captured by Yin Gang, put under house arrest in Morag, and forced to conduct research, the dwarves were furious. The Dwarf King even declared that Yin Gang was guilty of treason. The Dwarf Kingdom would no longer recognize him as a dwarf, and he would never be allowed to step into the territory of the dwarves. If it weren't for the captured dwarves who said that apart from having no freedom in Morag, the rest of their lives were pretty good, the Dwarf King would have issued a kill order. Jilin listened to the Dwarf King's words of gratitude and raised the barrel to gulp down the ale. Even the dwarves, who were known for their boldness in drinking, could not help but swallow their saliva quietly after seeing Jilin drinking. The dwarves who wanted to come forward to propose a toast held the large wine glass in their hands. It was really awkward to go up and go back. Finally, after glancing around, he found that everyone was looking around, and no one was looking at him, so he quietly walked back to his seat with a wine glass. The dwarves planned to use alcohol to show Jilin that the dwarves were grateful for his kindness ended in failure. It was not that the dwarves did not have the courage to drink to death, but the dwarves really could not do such a shameful thing as others holding the barrel and themselves holding the cup. The Dwarf King had been by Jilin's side. Watching Jilin drinking and eating meat, he said with a smile, "Hero, although we agreed in advance that we would make a giant sword for you after the matter is done, now that you have done such a great favor to the dwarves, if we only use a weapon to settle the matter, people will say that the dwarves are too stingy in the future. So I'll let people prepare some gifts for the hero first. The weapon will be brought to the benefactor later. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to ask. Don't be polite." After the Dwarf King finished speaking, he waved his hand, and immediately some dwarves put 4 or 5 huge leather bags on Jilin's table. Judging from the slightly open mouth of the bag, it was full of gold coins and gems. This was truly the right time, and it was extremely appropriate. Seeing this, Jilin nodded repeatedly. This was the first time that someone was so willing to give him treasures. In human terms, Jilin felt that he was simply the pride of the dragon race. If all dragons were like him, there would be no brave warriors coming to him. He had simply opened up a brand new, risk-free way for the dragon race to accumulate wealth. Seeing that Jilin was very satisfied, the Dwarf King was also very happy. So he ordered people to bring the giant sword that was specially made for Jilin. This huge sword needed 6 dwarves to lift it together, which showed that it was really heavy. The whole body of the huge sword was red. Including the hilt, it was 2 meters long. It looked very ferocious. If an ordinary person was hit by it, it was estimated that there was no hope of leaving a whole corpse. Jilin picked up the giant sword with one hand and gently swung it twice. The Dwarf King on the side looked at him with his eyebrows twitching. But the Dwarf King still tried to brag about the work of his own craftsmen and introduced it to Jilin. "Benefactor, look, this divine weapon can be regarded as the highest masterpiece of my dwarf race. It uses a lot of red crystal gold, which is excellent in heat resistance. The sword body is also very tough. At the same time, it also uses the most precious treasure of the dwarf race, life metal. Even if the weapon suffers any slight damage, it can recover by itself." Suddenly, a crack interrupted the speech of the Dwarf King. The Dwarf King's eyes bulged out, and his mouth made a meaningless sound of a... His hand pointing at Jilin couldn't help trembling. Finally, he jumped up and shouted, "What are you doing?" "My sword." Jilin held the broken giant sword in both hands and looked at the Dwarf King innocently. For the dwarves, it was not an exaggeration to say that the work that they poured all their efforts into was their own child. Not to mention the Dwarf King. Since the beginning of the dwarf race, the pinnacle of weapon forging was the dwarf king. On this continent, if the dwarf king pointed at an iron sword and said that it was the world's divine weapon, even the legendary powerhouses would nod and agree, because this was the authority of the dwarf race that had been passed down from generation to generation. As a result, this generation's dwarf king, Bronzebeard, was bragging to his benefactor about how outstanding his work was and how much effort he had put in to make his benefactor feel that it was not a loss to offend the Snow Wind Empire for the dwarf race. Then, in front of him, his benefactor broke his work that he was so proud of with his bare hands. As the dwarf king, Bronzebeard was really distressed and ashamed. He felt that he had lost the face of the dwarves. He looked at Jilin's eyes as if he saw Jilin saying, "Yo, this is the weapon of the dwarf race. TSK, TSK. It's really better to see than to hear about it. It's really hard to live up to its reputation." The dwarf king was embarrassed and at a loss. Finally, he saw the huge wine barrel beside Jilin. He grabbed it and said to Jilin, "Don't worry, I will definitely give you a weapon that will satisfy you." After that, he raised the wine barrel with both hands and drank wildly. All the dwarves applauded and expressed admiration for their king's fearlessness. Unsurprisingly, the dwarf king was drunk and unconscious after drinking half of the barrel. Jilin put down the wine barrel and glanced at the dwarf king, who was dragged away. He didn't say a word from beginning to end. As the dwarf king was drunk, the grand banquet could only end hastily. So Jilin carried the wine barrel and went up the mountain with Staya. Underground mountain. Bane sat on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the rolling magma river. There was no wind underground, so he didn't have to worry about being blown down by the wind. Bane's expression was extremely indifferent, neither sad nor happy. He had been like this since he came back from Morag. Other than eating and sleeping, he just sat here. If it wasn't for Staya secretly casting a protective spell on him, he would have been roasted dry. In fact, Jilin didn't think it was a big deal, but Staya always felt that it was not appropriate, so she called Jilin to have a heart-to-heart talk with Bane. As for Aisha, Staya thought that after the heart-to-heart talk with Aisha, Bane was more likely to jump down directly from here. Staya walked behind Bane and carefully thought about the language. "Bane, how are you? Are you still sad?" Bane thought about it carefully and said, "Actually, no. I don't know why, but I was really sad at the time, but now I'm just a little numb, but not sad. I just can't bring myself to be energetic about anything. Am I actually a very cold person?" Staya said softly, "Of course not. It's just because you know that no matter what, your life has to go on, so you have to numb yourself and suppress the sadness. This is a strong human instinct." Jilin sneered. "Staya, are you serious? This sounds a little weird." Staya was a little angry. She felt that it was a mistake to ask Jilin to come. It was okay if he didn't help, but he also caused trouble. "Of course, what else do you think?" Staya said, "I thought that there are too many humans and too many die all day, so you're used to it. If this is your instinct, in my opinion, it's very extravagant," Jilin said without thinking. "Actually, I know that I shouldn't blame you. I can only blame myself for not saying it clearly, but I still couldn't control myself. When I heard you describe death as a beautiful thing, I got even angrier," Bane said with a trembling voice. Jilin shrugged innocently. He raised the wine barrel and took a sip. Then he passed it to Bane and said, "Try it." Bane stood up and said, "Sure, let's try it." Bane came aggressively, but he soon realized awkwardly that he couldn't lift the wine barrel like Jilin. How could a normal person lift a 1.5-meter long and 1-meter wide wine barrel? So Jilin helped him lift the barrel and poured the wine into Bane's mouth. Bane held the barrel with both hands and gulped down the wine for a long time. Staya thought that Bane was trying to drink himself to death. Bane finally patted the barrel, so Jilin raised the barrel a little. Bane heaved a long sigh of relief, just like a drowning man who was finally rescued by someone. Jilin saw Bane's wobbly appearance and asked, "How are you?" Ben said vaguely, "I'm fine." After that, he fell straight to the ground. Soon, the sound of his breathing could be heard. Jilin smiled proudly at Staya and said, "How are you?" Staya rolled her eyes at him. Chapter 40. I didn't expect it to be so easy. No wonder humans always say that alcohol is a good thing. Jilin said as he looked at Bane, who was lying on the ground unconscious. Staya smiled in disdain and said, "Then may I ask, what do we do after he wakes up?" Jilin said strangely, "Didn't you teach me that drinking will solve 1,000 worries? Shouldn't he be fine after he wakes up?" "Then I'll teach you another sentence today. It's called cutting water with a knife makes water flow faster. Drinking to solve your worries makes you more worried." "What does that mean?" "It means that if you want to solve your worries by drinking, it's like trying to cut water with a knife. It's useless." Jilin was dazed and said, "Doesn't that conflict with the previous sentence?" Staya nodded and said indifferently, "That's right. It doesn't come from the same person." "Then why is it that the exact opposite principle is widely accepted by humans?" "Maybe because there are as many people who drink all day as there are people who despise drinking all day. If that's the case, doesn't that mean humans can judge right and wrong freely? It's you, it's not you. It's just a different way of saying it, a different principle. We humans call this doing things without leaving any loopholes. Despicable. Most humans refer to this as wisdom. This world isn't black and white to begin with. It's just that we're on different sides," Staya said. "It's you humans who mix black and white, not this world," Jilin said. Staya was speechless by Jilin. If she said this to any other human, they wouldn't be able to find any problems, but it had to be this thing. Staya thought, "Why should I talk about human principles with a dragon like you?" Therefore, she silently dragged Bane from the ground and walked towards Bane's residence. Jilin raised the wine barrel and drank for a while. He thought that wine was indeed a good thing. Aisha came up from the other side. When she saw Jilin holding the wine barrel, she said, "Don't waste your energy. Even if you drink all the wine in the Dwarf Kingdom, you won't get drunk." Jilin put down the wine barrel and smiled. "Why are you here?" "I don't know anyone here. I had nothing to do, so I came to take a look." "When did you come?" "I've been here for a while." Jilin sighed and said, "There are many creatures in this world that are smarter than humans, but none of them are more complicated than humans." "Oh, is that so?" Aisha was a little curious. She had never heard of Jilin praising humans so much. Of course, it's not hard to understand. After all, how many red-eyed white apes are there in a mountain? How many humans were there in a city? The red-eyed white apes used their intelligence to deceive and scheme against other stupid magic beasts, but humans were always fighting against their own kind. So for a long time, naturally, humans were better. They naturally occupied the ruling position of the world. Jilin said. Aisha saw Jilin talking enthusiastically, so she found a place to sit down and listen carefully. When she saw Jilin stop, she continued, and then she knew that Jilin was not discussing with her how humans dominated the world. Although humans are already the overlords of this world, they still lack a sense of security. They are vigilant against the threat of other races. All day long, they're like birds that are startled by the twang of a bow. Jilin said. Aisha nodded. She knew that the weapons developed by Snow Wind Empire made Jilin sigh. But at this time, she did not say that those weapons were actually used by Snow Wind Empire to guard against their own kind. They bully other races all day long, squeezing their living space, making other creatures homeless. Jilin said. Aisha felt that Jilin's words were indeed a bit too much. Moreover, she did not want to hear a young dragon being so sentimental with her. This made her feel very strange. So Aisha interrupted. What do you mean? What I mean is, humans are too arrogant, too selfish. They have never considered other creatures. They seem to think that humans are everything in this world. Only humans will treat the extinction of humans as the destruction of the world. They will say that the casualties of humans are a disaster, but they turn a blind eye to the creatures that are slaughtered by them every day. It seems that it is not your turn to say these words. Aisha said. She was very strange. She did not know why Jilin would have such thoughts. Indeed, there were many races that were bullied by humans, but it definitely did not include the dragon race. Based on his usual behavior, he would definitely not fight for the injustice of other races. Aisha suddenly understood. Jilin just could not stand the fact that humans were superior to other creatures and had a high and mighty attitude. This made Jilin very unhappy. Because in Jilin's opinion, that high and mighty position should belong to the dragon race. But now, humans were standing at the top. Just like the dragon race, they looked down on other races. In the eyes of humans, the dragon race also belonged to the other races. Jilin thought that the arrogance of humans had offended the noble dragon race. That was why Jilin was dissatisfied with humans. However, this was a chance. I have an idea, Aisha said slyly. What? Aisha took out the dark scripture and gestured to Jilin. There are many secret techniques recorded in this book. As long as you have enough knowledge and materials, you can use them. Jilin was somewhat disappointed. With his ability, Aisha's so-called secret technique shouldn't be able to give him any surprises. Until Aisha said the following sentence. The magic that turned you into a human is recorded in this book. There's also the magic that teleported me directly to you. Jilin's interest was immediately piqued. He still did not know how Aisha had appeared in front of him without a sound that day, not to mention the magic that turned him into a human. As far as he knew, in a long history of the dragon race, he was the only one who could completely turn into a human. Although it would weaken most of his power, it was obviously not a big deal. Jilin's eyes were faintly shining, showing a bright yellow color. He asked Aisha, "Then what's your idea?" An unconcealable smile appeared on the corner of Aisha's mouth. She seemed to have become a lot more lively and playful. It was very different from her usual mature and intellectual image. It was rare for Aisha to be unable to hide her true emotions. Aisha turned to the last page of the dark scripture and said to Jilin, "This page is the legendary final ritual of darkness of the continent. Although their description is not wrong, its real name is Darkness Descends. It is the final secret technique recorded in the dark scripture." Jilin looked at the black pages, then looked at Aisha and said, "I can't see anything clearly." Aisha closed the book and said, "Of course, not everyone can read it. Only the believers recognized by the God of Darkness, the Dark Saintess, can read it." Jilin looked at Aisha's proud attitude, thought for a moment, and said, "My father told me that the God of Darkness is not to be trusted. He is famous for being cunning. You should be careful." Aisha was stunned. She did not know whether to thank Jilin for his concern or to firmly defend the face of her god like Staya. "Then, what is the effect of this Darkness Descends?" Jilin asked. Aisha shook her head slightly and said, "I don't know. No one has ever performed this secret ritual." Jilin was a little annoyed. He felt that humans were really hopeless. How could an intelligent creature like Aisha be so stubborn about a bullshit secret technique that he did not even know about? It seemed that the influence of God on humans was really great. Although Jilin thought a lot, only one word came out of his mouth. Aisha heard Jilin's dissatisfaction and hurriedly said, "Although no one has seen the real effect, from the legends passed down from generation to generation, subverting the Church of Light is just a piece of cake. It will definitely have a huge impact on humans." Jilin shook his head and said, "My father told me a story. In the past, there was a group of human leaders called Ghost. Ghost wanted to take people to attack another group of humans, but the other group of humans had a powerful sword formation called Zhu Xian, which made Ghost helpless. Just when Ghost didn't know what to do, his counselor told him that there was no need to worry. He knew of a legendary magic formation. As long as he could find 4 fierce beasts and activate the magic formation, he would definitely be able to defeat the Zhu Xian sword formation. Ghost was very happy after hearing that. He spent more than 10 years collecting the 4 fierce beasts and took people to attack the other group of humans. When he reached the enemy's camp, he activated the magic formation. However, the result was not like what his counselor said. He did not break through the Zhu Xian sword formation. Instead, he was defeated by the Zhu Xian sword formation. There were countless casualties under Ghost's hands. Even Ghost was not spared. When Ghost was about to die, he thought that before this, his magic formation had never fought with the Zhu Xian sword formation. How could his counselor say that he would definitely win? He was too superstitious about the so-called legends. This story tells us that legends cannot be trusted, because legends are just legends. It was always unconsciously exaggerating. The only use is to make the listener happy and the speaker proud. But if someone takes the legend as the truth, then he will inevitably be disappointed. Jilin finished telling the story and took a sip of wine. He quietly looked at Aisha, his golden eyes bottomless. Chapter 41. Under the volcano, the magma was boiling, and from time to time, stones fell from the top of the cave and hit the magma, splashing beautiful and dangerous waves. The stones floated on the magma, and the extremely high temperature made the stones burn. The stones slowly sank as they burned, and finally completely sank until they merged with the magma, leaving only a few bubbles on the surface of the magma. Aisha's mood was like magma, seemingly calm, but in fact, it was surging with undercurrents. Once it broke out, it could be a stormy sea, from the time of the gods to the present. No which had ever doubted the authenticity of all the legends about the descent of darkness. Once someone could complete this magic, darkness would cover the earth and swallow all the light. At that time, the beautiful era that the witches were looking forward to would come. This was magic that could change the whole world, and all the witches believed in it without a doubt, or it could be said that the people of the whole continent never doubted it. Most of the things in the world were like this, no matter what the original appearance of the facts was. As long as it was accepted and believed by the majority of people, it was the truth. Until now, Jilin suddenly questioned the authenticity of this matter, but this made Aisha speechless. Because Aisha found that she really had no way to prove to Jilin that this matter was reliable, because she herself knew nothing about the effects of the descent of darkness. In the past, Aisha would have used the dark scriptures to communicate with the god of darkness and obtain the oracle to prove to others that she was right, and, at the same time, to strengthen her own beliefs. After all, in this world, who would doubt the gods? Even the people of the Church of Light would not doubt the oracle of the god of darkness. But it was obvious that Jilin, as the holy megalosaurus, did not think so. His upbringing told him that the god of darkness was insidious and cunning, and was extremely difficult to kill. The god of light was hypocritical and had great ambitions. Aisha could not persuade Jilin in the name of God, but she still did not want to give up easily. The reason why the descent of darkness had never been cast was that the materials needed could be said to be shocking, outrageous, and tragic. It was not easy to be achieved by human power, but with Jilin's help, the difficulty would obviously be greatly reduced. Not to mention other things, just the red dragon scale alone could not be avoided. No matter what, I have to try. Aisha said. Really? All right, if there's anything I can help you with, don't hesitate, Jilin said. Jilin saw Aisha's eyes light up in an instant. At this moment, Jilin clearly felt a kind of pressure. As Aisha's gaze fell on him, he seemed to have gotten himself into trouble. Thus, Jilin quickly added, I'm just saying it in passing. Aisha nodded repeatedly, indicating that she understood. Then she quickly approached Jilin and said, If that's the case, then you can do me a small favor. What? Jilin asked. Give me one of your scales, Aisha said. Do you know what you're talking about? Jilin's finger was raised. It seemed that the scales of the red dragon would have to be found elsewhere. Perhaps the scales of the sacred megalosaurus would do as well. The common scales of the wyverns would also do, right? Probably, Aisha thought. Morag, your majesty. Duke Lawrence and Grand Secretary Bello knelt in front of the Iron Blood Emperor. The Iron Blood Emperor wasn't sitting on the magnificent throne. Instead, he stood by the window of the moving city with his hands behind his back, looking at the god armaments that were miserably scattered around. After a long silence, well done, the Iron Blood Emperor said. Duke Lawrence didn't understand what the Iron Blood Emperor's words meant. He didn't even know who he was talking to. Bello knew that the Iron Blood Emperor was praising Lawrence for not letting Morag suffer any damage during the invasion of the Red Disaster. After all, the last time the Red Disaster invaded human territory, more than half of the Saimai Empire's palace was destroyed. Therefore, the Duke could be said to have done a good deed this time. Of course, if people knew that it was the Duke who brought Jilin to Morag, it would be a different story. Seeing that Lawrence still hadn't reacted, Bello could only remind him, Why aren't you thanking His Majesty? The Duke hurriedly said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. This is just my duty as a member of the Empire." The Iron Blood Emperor said, Duke Lawrence bowed and said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, I think that your crusade against the dwarves and Aisha's group is not worth the losses. Even if we have full confidence, that monster's strength is not to be underestimated. We are bound to suffer great losses. Since they have already left the Empire and we didn't suffer great losses, why don't we just let it go? I implore Your Majesty to reconsider." The Iron Blood Emperor shook his head and said, "Bello." Grand Secretary Bello replied, "Yes." Then he turned to Duke Lawrence and said, "Duke, there is something you don't know." The Duke looked at Bello, who was speaking tirelessly, and thought to himself, "No wonder he can be second only to one person. I don't even know what His Majesty is talking about. Look at him. What does it mean to be quick-witted? What does it mean to be able to understand something just by listening to the strings? I am ashamed of my inferiority. 2 years ago, the Simi Empire ignited the beacon tower of humanity. I'm sure you already know about this. The reason for igniting the beacon was that the sacred city was invaded by a holy megalosaurus. The Simi Empire's palace was destroyed, and even the Holy Light Formation was unable to stop it. The Sacred King believed that the Holy Megalosaurus was too powerful and could even threaten the continuation of the entire human race. The entire human race needs to unite and make plans early. All the emperors of the human race went to the Conference of the Kings and contributed their empire's strength. They agreed to fight the Red Disaster together 10 years later. But what does this have to do with us now? The Duke asked. His Majesty believes that the human monster you are talking about is the Red Disaster. Because at that time in the Simi Empire, Aisha was working with the Red Disaster and kidnapped the saint of the Holy Church of Light, Bello said. How could this be? Isn't it precisely because of this that we should be more cautious and reduce conflicts with the other party? Let's wait until 10 years later to fight to the death with him. It was originally everyone's problem, but now we have to do it ourselves? The Duke was puzzled. If we really don't do anything and just wait until 10 years later to fight with him, then it will really be a case of man proposes and God disposes. His Majesty believes that this battle is very necessary because we don't know the true strength of the other party. Someone needs to test the waters. Since he has appeared in the Snow Wind Empire, then we naturally won't decline. Moreover, the other empires have already sent reinforcements. This battle will be a drill for the battle 10 years later. No, it will be 8 years later, Bello said. So you're saying that His Majesty has no intention of winning this battle? The Duke asked with a trembling voice. That's right, the Iron Blood King said. If that's the case, why does His Majesty want to personally take the risk? The Duke asked. We might not necessarily lose, the Iron Blood King said. Then may I ask Your Majesty, before leaving the imperial city, did you appoint a crown prince? The Duke widened his eyes and looked at the Iron Blood King with a burning gaze. Impudent! Bello was shocked. He didn't think that Duke Lawrence would dare to directly say this in front of His Majesty. This was simply cursing His Majesty to die early. Grand Secretary Bello finally understood why Duke Lawrence, as a hereditary duke, had stayed away from the imperial court for decades. Even if he had more courage, he wouldn't dare to say these words in front of His Majesty. The Iron Blood King didn't care and said with a faint smile, In the end, we are family. The Lawrence family had been a top-notch noble family since the founding of the empire. The first-generation Duke Lawrence and the Iron Blood Emperor had even become sworn brothers. It was only natural that the children of both sides would be betrothed. After that, it was even more natural for generations to intermarry. Which generation of the Lawrence family's patriarch didn't have a princess wife? The Iron Blood King of that generation didn't have a concubine from the Lawrence family. After so many years, the bloodlines of the two sides had already blended together. Normally speaking, Duke Lawrence of this generation should be the Iron Blood King's cousin. In the words of the Middle Empire, he was a standard imperial relative. Grand Secretary Bello was loyal to the Iron Blood King, while Duke Lawrence was loyal to the Snow Wind Empire. It sounded similar, but there was still a difference. Bello saw that the Iron Blood King wasn't angry, so he said to the Duke, Sir Duke, you don't need to worry. Even if we lose, His Majesty's safety will be guaranteed. It's still too early to talk about the matter of appointing a crown prince. The Duke said angrily. On the battlefield, how can there be a guarantee? The Iron Blood King said indifferently. We have to take a look. Chapter 42. Hearing Iron Blood King's words, the veins on Duke Lawrence's forehead suddenly bulged. Thousands of words flashed through his mind, but he couldn't say it out loud, because those words were all directed at the Emperor, and every sentence could be said to be disgraceful. The Duke took a deep breath and suppressed it. Your Majesty must be joking. Your Majesty is the ruler of the Snow Wind Empire. Your Majesty's eyes and ears are everywhere in the Snow Wind Empire. Why should Your Majesty personally take the risk? What's more, my Snow Wind Empire's territory covers more than 10,000 miles. If Your Majesty has to do everything personally, I'm afraid that you won't be able to do anything at the same time. Iron Blood King said, I've already decided. Since Iron Blood King had already called himself, it meant that he was talking to his subjects with the identity of the Emperor. There was no room for discussion, unless they wanted to rebel or die. The Duke obviously didn't want to rebel or die, so he could only retreat with Bello and return this space to this lonely person. In a long corridor, the Duke and Bello walked side by side. The guards on both sides of the corridor saluted to them. Bello nodded in response from time to time, but the Duke strode forward with his head held high. Neither of them spoke, because both of them knew that this was not a suitable place to talk. The Duke said that His Majesty's eyes and ears were everywhere, and that was definitely not an exaggeration. The two of them walked out of the palace in the moving city and walked on the road of the city. They also came to the never-ending snow of the Snow Wind Empire. Standing in the city, who would have thought that it had crossed the mountain and walked here? The wind and snow blew Bello's robe and also pulled the Duke's red cloak straight. This was a good place to talk. The wind and snow would blow their conversation to the horizon, but it wouldn't blow into other people's ears. The Duke felt the moving city under his feet, looked around and sighed. It's really a work of the gods. It could be called a miracle. But Sir Duke still doesn't have enough confidence in it. Forgive me for speaking bluntly, but I really can't imagine what kind of creature can make the Duke think that it can defeat such a mighty force alone. Bello pointed to the ground and said, That's why I said that you can't imagine its horror without seeing it with your own eyes. The Duke said, Your Majesty is convinced by Sir Duke's words. Bello said. The Duke looked at Bello and felt his back go numb. His eyes widened and his pupils shrank. He said bitterly, You mean His Majesty decided to see the other party's strength personally because of what I said? Bello looked at the Duke quietly without saying anything. He believed that he had already made himself very clear, and there was no need to repeat himself. The Duke's expression was as ugly as if he had just swallowed a dead fly. He stood there, letting the snowflakes hit his face. However, within the entire Snow Wind Empire, due to the high temperature, there were no such creatures as flies. Seeing the Duke's ugly expression, Bello could only say, It is indeed imperative to find out the strength of the Red Disaster. This matter concerns the fate of the entire human race. It is of great significance and cannot be lost. This is a joint operation of all the empires, so it's not too much for Your Majesty to personally lead the expedition. Bello spoke seriously, but the Duke disdainfully said, You're making a big deal out of nothing. You don't know how many humans there are. They're like sand in a muddy river. Even if it's strong, it's just one of us. It can't kill us all by itself. Humans had this kind of confidence, because no matter what kind of difficulties they faced, they were not worth mentioning in front of the terrifying number of humans. Someone once said that even the smallest amount of power multiplied by a few billion was enough to topple mountains and overturn seas. No matter how great the difficulty was, divided by a few billion, it was negligible. That was why they advocated unity. They believed that as long as they were united, humans would be invincible. From the current situation, this was indeed the case. The only thing that humans feared was God, or the natural disaster created by God, and not some megalosaurus. So what if you're invincible? Billions of people piled on top of you could kill you. So what if humans could not unite? Billions of people were waiting for you to kill, and you could kill until you were exhausted. For the entire human race, it was not even a serious injury. The sky is clear and the sun is bright. The people live and work in peace. The empire is prosperous, and the people are at peace. This is the fate of humans. Being shrouded in shadows, everyone is in constant fear, not knowing when they will be killed by the megalosaurus. The empire will collapse, and the people will be displaced. This is also the fate of humans. Since that's the case, we naturally want the first one. Chief Abe Luo said, "The problem is that His Majesty has no intention of winning this time. Who will want to fight this kind of war?" Duke Lawrence said, "This is not the end of the war, it's only the beginning. Probing the enemy's true strength is the most important thing on the battlefield." Duke is also someone who is familiar with the art of war. How could you not know this? Bei Luo said, Duke Lawrence naturally knew the importance of probing the enemy's true strength. He had been familiar with the art of war since he was young, and there was a chapter in the art of war called True Strength. However, Duke Lawrence could not accept that the Snow Wind Empire was the vanguard of the entire human race. Even the Iron Blood King had to personally take the risk to probe the enemy's true strength. Duke Lawrence had previously exclaimed that the mobile city was a miracle, but he did not dare to imagine how much manpower and resources the Empire had spent to create this miracle. Was it really good for the Empire to pay such a huge price? If the Empire used up too much strength in the crusade against the Red Disaster, then after the Red Disaster, the Empire would very likely face the oppression of other empires. But what could he do? He had already lost his position because His Majesty the Emperor had listened to him and decided to come to the battlefield. He could no longer stop His Majesty from going to the battlefield to face that monster. Sir Duke, this one believes that we do not have the strength to kill the enemy, but that does not mean that we cannot repel it. As far as I know, the dragon race cherishes their lives very much. As long as we display great strength, I believe that it will retreat in the face of difficulties. Also, the reinforcements from the Saimai Empire and the Middle Empire will arrive soon. We are not fighting alone. Only His Majesty has the qualifications to command the armies of so many empires. Bei Luo said. Duke Lawrence thought for a bit and felt that Bei Luo's words were reasonable. So he nodded and said, "I have nothing to say about His Majesty going to the battlefield, but do we really need to face the Red Disaster head-on? In my opinion, although his strength is terrifying, he does not seem like a madman who would kill people all over the world. The important point is not whether he will or not, but whether he can or not." Chief Minister Bei Luo said. The Duke was silent. He once charged into the palace of the Saimai Empire and kidnapped the princess of the empire. Although the sacred monarch used all the power of the empire, he was unable to stop him. If one day he invades our palace and wants to kill His Majesty, tell me, what should we do then? How can we protect His Majesty? Bei Luo said, "So, we should just strike first to gain the initiative? That way, we can make preparations to avoid being caught off guard and being unable to retaliate?" The Duke said, "That's right. It will take some time for humans to gather their strength. There is no other way. A hastily gathered strength will not be able to resist the Red Disaster." Bei Luo said. Duke Lawrence nodded and said, "Since that is the case, we can only fight." After saying that, he turned around and left without looking back. Chief Minister Bei Luo bowed and said, "Take care, Duke." After getting up, he also turned around and left. His goal had been achieved. Chief Minister Bei Luo had convinced Duke Lawrence. He had also convinced the traditional nobles of the Wind Moon Empire that Duke Lawrence represented. On this matter, the entire Wind Moon Empire could be said to be united. The two of them, one in the south and one in the north, braving the snow. Although they were going opposite directions, their goal was the same. Chief Minister Bei Luo moved with the wind. The clothes on his back were fiercely pressed against his body by the wind, but his footsteps were lighter. Duke Lawrence's cloak danced in the wind. Although it was a bit difficult for him to walk, he still looked majestic. Chief Minister Bei Luo and the young nobles were on the right side. Duke Lawrence was on the left side with his family's power. Although they expressed it in different ways, they were both loyal. Although they were going in different directions, they could help each other in times of trouble. There was no lack of power, no lack of loyalty. The Iron Blood King stood by the window and looked at the two of them, listening to the news sent back by the scouts. Even though he was not good with words, he only said, "This life is fortunate." Chapter 43. Hantel, the Dwarf King's personal forging workshop. This was the place where the entire dwarf race, as well as the entire world, gathered and crystallized their forging skills. In this room, countless divine weapons that could set off a bloody storm in the human world were displayed in rows. Looking at each other, one could actually see some ordinary feelings from these divine weapons. Jilin sat in front of a huge black forging furnace, continuously heating it. The Dwarf King and more than 20 top dwarf craftsmen shuttled back and forth in this huge workshop. Outside, countless strong people would flock to the weapon masters, but here, they could only stand at the outermost periphery of the room and observe the skills of the dwarven masters from afar. At the same time, they deeply hated that their skills were a little shallow. If they could swing their hammers a few more times, they might be able to join this exciting great cause today. That's right, in the hearts of the dwarves, the matter of making weapons for Jilin had already reached the height of a great cause. Now, with the help of Jilin, many dream ores that could not be used before could be tried. This was great news for the dwarves. For these dream ores, the dwarves have been full of countless fantasies since ancient times. There was once a dwarf ancestor who held an ore that emitted a strong light and said that as long as this sunstone could be melted, he might be able to make a weapon that surpassed the hero's holy sword. All the dwarves nodded. No one thought that this dwarf ancestor was boasting, because they also felt that if they could melt the sunstone, then as long as it was a dwarf, they could make a divine weapon. But the problem was that no one had ever been able to melt the sunstone, because its internal temperature was much higher than fire. There were countless such statements in the history of the dwarves. Whenever the dwarves encountered an ore that could not be used, they would imagine the ore to be extremely beautiful. What you could not get was the best. This sentence was not only applicable to humans. The sunstone that had a higher temperature than fire, the snowstone that could freeze fire, the firestone that could not be approached by fire, and so on. The dwarves collectively called these ores dream ores. After so many years, the dwarves had accumulated a lot of such ores. Because they could not use them and were reluctant to throw them away, they could only keep them. Now that Jilin had arrived, the dwarves finally understood what it meant to sweep away their years of depression. A sunstone that was hotter than Huoyin? Under Jilin's flames, it melted faster than other ordinary ores. The fire avoidance stone that Huoyin Yin could not get close to? Jilin's flames could vaporize it without even getting close. Now, the dream or solution was boiling in the newest forging furnace. The Dwarf King was observing carefully through the observation hole on the high platform. He didn't want to miss any changes. The liquid was like lava, but it was brighter and more intense. Colorful lights were constantly shining out of the observation hole. Every dwarf was very curious about what the Dwarf King had seen. At the same time, every dwarf believed that the scene must be very beautiful, because it was the vision of generations of dwarves, and also because of the ferocious expression of the Dwarf King in front of them. The Dwarf King's teeth were chattering. Even though his upper and lower teeth had never separated, everyone present could still clearly hear every word that was squeezed out from his body. Steady, steady, that's right. That's it. Steady. Soon, I can feel that the unprecedented masterpiece of my dwarf race is about to be born. The dwarf kept talking. Jilin looked at the dwarf in front of him, who seemed to be about to go crazy, and couldn't help but shake his head. Just by looking at Bronzebeard's current state, who could imagine that this was the majestic and beloved king of the dwarves? Sure enough, when intelligent creatures touched on things that they really cared about, there was no wisdom to speak of course. He, who was extremely obsessed with gold coins and treasures, was not qualified to despise them condescendingly. His obsession with treasures seemed to be the inheritance of the dragon bloodline, not because of his own greed. After all, he had never heard of a dragon who spent money. Jilin said in his heart. Jilin ridiculed the dwarf king in his heart, but the other dwarves obviously did not think so. They did not question the king's gaffe, but followed his mood. The more excited the dwarf king was, the more excited they were. The dwarf king was lying on the observation hole, not caring about dirtying his gorgeous robe, just to get closer to the solution. Suddenly, the dwarf king's body trembled, and he shouted in a slightly high-pitched voice, "Now, Jilin, increase the firepower." "Okay," Jilin agreed. His eyes lit up slightly. He had begun to use the power that was sealed. The solution in the forging furnace began to tumble more violently. The colorful light seemed to begin to merge slowly and was about to become one, but the solution began to disappear at a speed visible to the naked eye. "No, this is impossible." The dwarf king held his head with both hands and roared. The dwarf king's expression was as if he had suddenly seen the sky fall, or the dwarf race was suddenly exterminated by someone else. After the dwarf king shouted, he fell from the high platform. Although the rest of the dwarves were good, they all suffered the same blow and failed to catch the dwarf king. As for Jilin, he was too lazy to move at all. But fortunately, the dwarf king's strength was not shallow, so he did not fall and injure himself. The dwarf king got up from the ground, and without even patting the soil on his body, he began to walk in circles and mumble. "Why is this happening? Is it really like what the ancestors said, that the snow stone and the sunstone cannot be smelted together? But even so, it shouldn't disappear in a thin air like this." The dwarf king's words drilled into Jilin's ears word for word. Jilin had to cough and say, "Sorry to interrupt. You think it disappeared into thin air because the furnace leaked again." The dwarf king was stunned on the spot, and he followed Jilin's gaze. Sure enough, there was a big hole in the forging furnace. The colorful solution was constantly flowing down, flowing all over the ground. The dwarf king glanced at his subordinates who were stunned in place and couldn't help but shout, "You idiots, hurry up and find a container to catch it." This solution was made of extremely precious ore, some of which were rare even in the dwarf race's collection. Every second that flowed, even the dwarf king couldn't help but feel pain. A dwarf ran to the dwarf king and whispered, "Your Majesty, the temperature of this solution is too high now. We don't have any container to hold it." The dwarf king said with hatred, "Well, after it cools down, chisel down all the ground with oars, and then extract all the stones on the oars. I don't want to see the ground in my forging room with a different color." After the dwarf king finished speaking, he looked at the big hole in the forging furnace in a daze, and then looked at Jilin. Finally, he stomped his feet and left without saying a word. Jilin's fire could melt any known material. This was definitely good news for the dwarf race. However, since it could melt any material, it meant that it could also melt any forging furnace. This was a huge challenge for the dwarf race. If this problem could not be solved, then creating a weapon that could satisfy Jilin's needs would be tantamount to a fool's dream. Unlike the thorny problem faced by the dwarf king, the other dwarves did not feel any difficulty in the face of the dwarf king's order. Although the dwarf king said that the amount of work was very large, that was only for humans. Chiseling stones and extracting or impurities were the basic skills of the dwarves. What was more, everyone knew that those ores were extremely precious. Even if the dwarf king didn't say it, they would take the initiative to do it. Jilin was still sitting in front of the forging furnace. He felt that if he wanted a weapon suitable for himself, it would be impossible to rely on the power of the dwarves alone. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.